Franz Kafka died in 1924, coughing blood, unable to swallow, starving because his throat had closed. He was 40 years old. He had published almost nothing. A few strange stories in magazines nobody read. 3 thin books that sold in the dozens. He worked in an office processing insurance claims for injured workers. He lived with his parents. He never married. His last words were instructions to his best friend. Burn everything I wrote. Destroy it all. Max Brod did not listen. He published the novels Kafka left unfinished. He published the stories, the letters, the diaries, everything. This act of betrayal gave the world one of its greatest writers. Franz Kafka was born on July 3, 1883, in Prague, a city that belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Prague in those days was a place of multiple identities. German speakers, Czech speakers, and Jews lived side by side, often uneasily. Kafka belonged to all 3 worlds and to none of them completely. He was a German-speaking Jew in a predominantly Czech city, part of an empire that would soon collapse. His father, Hermann Kafka, was a self-made man. Hermann came from a poor Jewish family in southern Bohemia and built a successful business selling fancy goods. He was physically imposing, loud, and confident. Hermann represented everything Franz was not. The father valued strength, practicality, and commercial success. The son was thin, quiet, and drawn to literature. Kafka's mother, Julie, came from a wealthy family. She was educated and cultured, but her role in the household was secondary to Hermann's dominating presence. Franz had 3 younger sisters, Ellie, Vali, and Otla. He was closest to Otla, who shared his rebellious spirit. All 3 sisters would later die in Nazi concentration camps during the Holocaust. The family lived above Hermann's shop in the Old Town Square. Young Franz spent much of his childhood alone or with governesses while his parents worked. This isolation would become a recurring theme in his writing. He attended German language schools, which placed him in the minority within Prague's educational system. Most Czech children attended Czech schools. At 18, Kafka entered Charles University to study law. He did not choose this path out of passion. Law was practical, respectable, and would satisfy his father. But university introduced him to literature, philosophy, and a circle of intellectuals. He met Max Brod, who would become his closest friend, and eventually the man who would disobey his dying wish. Kafka's student years coincided with profound changes in European thought. Freud was developing psychoanalysis. Einstein was working on relativity. The old certainties of the 19th century were dissolving. Kafka absorbed these currents. He read philosophy, attended lectures, and began to write seriously. After completing his doctorate in 1906, Kafka took a job at an insurance company. A year later, he moved to the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute, where he would work for most of his adult life. The job was stable and allowed him afternoons free for writing. He investigated workplace accidents, assessed compensation claims, and wrote reports. The bureaucratic machinery he encountered daily would later appear in his fiction, transformed into something nightmarish. Kafka's working life followed a strict routine. He spent mornings at the office, ate lunch with his family, napped, then wrote late into the night. He often wrote until 2 or 3 in the morning. This schedule exhausted him, but it was the only way he could maintain both his job and his art. His health suffered. He complained constantly of headaches, insomnia, and digestive problems. In 1912, Kafka met Felice Bauer at Max Brod's apartment. Felice lived in Berlin and worked for a dictation machine company. Their relationship would drag on for 5 years, conducted mostly through letters. Kafka wrote her hundreds of letters, obsessive and contradictory. He proposed marriage twice. He broke off both engagements. He wanted intimacy but feared it would destroy his ability to write. That same year, in a single night, Kafka wrote The Judgment, a story about a young man whose father condemns him to death by drowning. The son obeys. Kafka later called this his breakthrough. Shortly after, he wrote The Metamorphosis in a few weeks. The story of Gregor Samsa, who wakes up transformed into an insect, became his most famous work during his lifetime. World War I broke out in 1914. Kafka was exempt from military service due to his work at the Insurance Institute. Prague became a city of food shortages and political tension. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was crumbling. Czech nationalism grew stronger. The comfortable world of German-speaking Jews began to collapse. In 1917, Kafka coughed up blood. The diagnosis was tuberculosis. In that era, tuberculosis was often a death sentence. There were no antibiotics. Treatment consisted of rest, fresh air, and hope. Kafka spent time in sanatoria in the countryside. His illness became an excuse to break his engagement with Felice once and for all. The collapse of the empire in 1918 changed everything. Austria-Hungary ceased to exist. Czechoslovakia became an independent nation. Prague was now the capital of a Czech state. German speakers lost their privileged position. Jews found themselves in an uncertain situation, associated with the old German-speaking elite but not fully part of it. Kafka's tuberculosis worsened. He took leave from work. He lived with Otla in the countryside. He had brief relationships with other women. He met Dora Diamant, a young woman from an Orthodox Jewish family, in 1923. They moved to Berlin together. It was the happiest period of his life, but it lasted less than a year. By 1924, Kafka could barely speak. The tuberculosis had spread to his larynx. He entered a sanatorium near Vienna. He continued to correct proofs of his final story collection. Even as he was dying, he communicated by writing notes. On June 3, 1924, Franz Kafka died at the age of 40. He was buried in the New Jewish Cemetery in Prague. Kafka published little during his lifetime. A few stories appeared in literary magazines. 3 slim volumes were released. He was known in small literary circles, but not beyond. Before his death, he asked Max Brod to burn all his unpublished manuscripts. Brod refused. Instead, he spent decades editing and publishing Kafka's novels, stories, letters, and diaries. Without Brod's disobedience, the world would not know The Trial, The Castle, or most of what we now consider Kafka's major works. Max Brod's betrayal of his friend's final wish gave the world one of its greatest literary legacies. The relationship between Franz Kafka and his father Hermann was not simply difficult, it was the central wound of Kafka's life, the source from which much of his writing flowed. Hermann Kafka was a physical man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and strong. He had built his business through force of will and hard work. He swam, he ate with gusto, he spoke loudly. He filled rooms with his presence. Franz, by contrast, was thin, weak, and prone to illness. He picked at his food. He spoke quietly. He shrank from physical confrontation. Hermann saw his son as a disappointment. Franz was not interested in business. He did not marry and produce grandchildren. He wasted his time with books and writing, activities Hermann considered frivolous. Hermann expressed his contempt openly. He mocked Franz at the dinner table. He compared him unfavorably to his employees. He called him weak, useless, and ingrate. Franz internalized these judgments. Throughout his life, he saw himself as inadequate, unable to meet basic standards of manhood. His letters and diaries return obsessively to his physical weakness, his inability to make decisions, his fundamental wrongness. The father's voice became the voice in his head. In 1919, Franz wrote a letter to his father. It ran to over 100 pages. The letter was never delivered. In it, Kafka attempted to explain the effect Hermann had on him. He described growing up in the shadow of a giant. Every word from his father was law. Every gesture was a commandment, but the laws contradicted each other. What pleased his father one day would anger him the next. There was no way to win. The letter describes a childhood memory. Franz had begged for water one night. His father, annoyed at being woken, carried him out onto the balcony and left him there in his nightshirt. Kafka wrote that he stood on the balcony, believing he was too worthless even to deserve water. The memory haunted him. Whether it happened exactly as he remembered matters less than the psychological truth it contained. Hermann represented absolute authority. His judgments were final, he could not be questioned, but his authority had no rational basis. It derived purely from his strength and his position as father. This arbitrary power appears throughout Kafka's fiction. Judges who never explain their verdicts, officials who cannot be reached, fathers who condemn their sons to death. In The Judgment, a story Kafka considered autobiographical, a young man named Georg Bendemann has an argument with his elderly father. The father accuses Georg of betraying him, of pushing him aside, of planning to marry and abandon him. The accusations make no logical sense, but the father pronounces sentence, death by drowning. Georg accepts the judgment and immediately throws himself off a bridge. The story captures something essential about Kafka's experience of authority. The father's power does not require justification. His accusations do not need to be true. The son cannot defend himself because there are no rules of evidence, no procedure, no appeal. The father simply is the law. This pattern repeats in The Metamorphosis. Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed into an insect. His father's reaction is not pity or concern, but rage. When Gregor emerges from his room, his father drives him back with a newspaper. Later, the father bombards him with apples, injuring him severely. The apple lodged in Gregor's back becomes infected and contributes to his death. The father's violence is presented as natural, inevitable. Kafka extended this family dynamic to larger structures. The insurance company where he worked operated on the same principle as his father's household. Rules existed, but they were arbitrary. Superiors issued commands without explanation. Subordinates obeyed or were punished. The system perpetuated itself through its own weight. In the trial, Joseph K. is arrested without being told his crime. He spends the novel trying to understand the accusation against him and access the court that is judging him. He never succeeds. The court is everywhere and nowhere. It operates in attics and basements. Its officials are corrupt and incompetent, but its authority is absolute. In the end, Joseph K. is executed like a dog, still not knowing what he did wrong. The novel is not simply about legal systems. It is about the experience of authority itself. To be subject to authority is to live with constant guilt. You must have done something wrong, otherwise, why would you be accused? The accusation creates the guilt. This was Kafka's experience with his father and his experience in the world. The castle presents a similar situation. K arrives in a village to take up a position as land surveyor, but he cannot confirm his appointment. The castle that employs him is unreachable. Officials contradict each other. Messages arrive late or not at all. K spends the entire novel trying to speak with someone who can clarify his position. He never succeeds. The castle represents all distant authority: governments, corporations, social hierarchies. These structures claim to serve rational purposes. They have rules and procedures, but when you actually encounter them, you find confusion, contradiction, and indifference. The authority remains, but its legitimacy dissolves upon examination. Kafka did not write political allegories. He was not consciously critiquing specific institutions. He was exploring his own psychological reality, but that reality mirrored a broader social truth. The modern world was organized around impersonal structures of authority. These structures demanded obedience while providing no real justification for their power. The father wound was also a religious wound. Hermann Kafka was nominally Jewish, but not observant. He attended synagogue a few times a year out of social obligation. Franz saw through this hypocrisy. His father invoked tradition when convenient, but ignored it otherwise. The result was authority without transcendence, law without meaning. Kafka's rebellion against his father was never open. He could not confront Hermann directly. Instead, he rebelled through his writing. He created worlds where authority was absolute but absurd, where fathers were all-powerful but monstrous, where the son could only escape through transformation into something non-human. Yet Kafka never fully freed himself. He internalized his father's judgment so thoroughly that he judged himself more harshly than Hermann ever did. His diaries record endless self-accusations. He was lazy, weak, selfish, incapable of love. The relationship between Franz and Hermann represents a universal human experience. The child confronts parental authority and internalizes it. That authority becomes conscience. For most people, this process is gradual and manageable. For Kafka, it was total and devastating. His writing gave form to this devastation and made visible the psychological reality of living under arbitrary authority. The trial of existence, guilt without crime. Joseph K. wakes up on the morning of his 30th birthday to find two warders in his room. They inform him he is under arrest. When he demands to know the charge, they tell him they are not authorized to provide that information. He must wait for official notification, but he is not taken to jail. He can continue his life normally. He simply exists now under the weight of an unspecified accusation. This is the premise of The Trial, the novel Kafka worked on from 1914 to 1915 but never completed. It remains one of the most unsettling works in modern literature, not because of what happens, but because of what never becomes clear. Joseph K. is a respectable bank officer. He has done nothing wrong, or so he believes. Yet from the moment of his arrest, he accepts his guilt. He does not protest his innocence with conviction. He does not refuse to cooperate with the court. Instead, he tries to navigate the legal process, to find out what he is accused of, to mount a defense. His acceptance of the premise is his first mistake. The court in The Trial exists in the margins of ordinary life. K is summoned to a hearing in the attic of a tenement building. He finds a crowded room full of spectators and officials. The examining magistrate sits at a small table. When K makes a speech denouncing the corruption of the proceedings, some of the spectators applaud. He leaves feeling he has won a small victory. Later, he learns that many people in the room were court officials. His speech meant nothing. The court has no fixed location. It operates in attics, storage rooms, and back offices. Official business bleeds into ordinary spaces. A closet at K's bank turns out to house a whipping scene where the two warders who arrested him are being punished for accepting bribes. The boundaries between the legal system and daily life dissolve completely. K seeks help from various people. A painter named Titorelli claims to know the judges and offers to intercede. But Titorelli explains that actual acquittal is almost impossible. The best one can hope for is indefinite postponement. The trial never ends. It simply becomes dormant. Or there is ostensible acquittal, which looks like freedom but leaves one vulnerable to rearrest at any moment. True acquittal, where the charges are dismissed completely, exists only in legend. A lawyer named Huld takes K's case, but Huld does nothing. He speaks vaguely about submitting petitions. He mentions contacts in the court. Months pass with no progress. K visits the lawyer's apartment and finds other clients waiting, men who have been involved in their cases for years. They grovel before Huld, grateful for any scrap of attention. K eventually fires him. The court's power derives not from its efficiency, but from its inscrutability. No one understands how it works. Lawyers claim expertise, but demonstrate none. Judges are rumored to exist, but never appear. The law itself remains inaccessible. In the cathedral near the end of the novel, a priest tells K a parable about a man who spends his entire life waiting at a door to the law. The doorkeeper refuses him entry. Only when the man is dying does he learn that this door was meant only for him, and now it will be closed. The parable suggests that the law exists but cannot be accessed. It is there behind the door but always out of reach. The doorkeeper is merely an obstacle, not the source of the prohibition. Yet the man never tries to push past him. He accepts the doorkeeper's authority without question. His life is consumed by waiting for permission that never comes. Kafka understood that guilt does not require a crime. In religious terms, humanity is guilty by virtue of existing. Original sin taints everyone before they commit any particular act. Kafka was not a believing Jew, but this concept resonated with his psychological reality. He felt guilty always, without knowing why. Modern legal systems are supposed to work differently. They presume innocence. They specify charges. They provide procedures for defense. But Kafka saw that these protections were formal only. In practice, being accused creates suspicion. Being investigated implies wrongdoing. The process itself becomes punishment. Joseph K. experiences this directly. His arrest changes how others see him. His landlady becomes suspicious. His colleagues at the bank gossip. He spends his evenings and Sundays dealing with the case instead of living his life. The trial consumes his energy and attention even though nothing concrete happens. He is being punished without being convicted. The novel explores how power operates through uncertainty. If Joseph K. knew the charge against him, he could defend himself. If he understood the court's procedures, he could navigate them. But he knows nothing, and this ignorance keeps him paralyzed. He cannot form a strategy. He cannot tell who to trust. Every action might help or harm his case. This uncertainty is more effective than direct coercion. A prisoner in chains knows his situation and can dream of escape. Joseph K. is not imprisoned. He is free, except he is not. He must participate in his own prosecution while having no idea how to do so effectively. The court allows him enough freedom to exhaust himself in futile efforts. Kafka had direct experience with bureaucratic systems. His work at the Insurance Institute involved assessing claims and applying regulations. He saw how rules could be interpreted differently by different officials. He observed how decisions were made based on unwritten norms rather than stated policies. He understood that bureaucracies do not function according to their own stated principles. But the trial goes beyond critique of bureaucracy. It addresses existential guilt. Joseph K. may not have committed a legal crime, but has he lived rightly? Has he been good? Has he fulfilled his obligations? When he examines his life, he finds it empty. He has focused on his career. He has had casual relationships with women. He has not engaged deeply with anything. The court, then, might represent his own conscience. The accusation comes from within. He knows he is guilty of something, even if he cannot name it. The trial is his attempt to understand and address this vague sense of moral failure. But there is no resolution, because the guilt is not specific, it is existential. In the final chapter, two men come to collect K. They walk him out of the city to a quarry. They pass a knife back and forth over him. Neither wants to be the executioner. Finally, K sees a figure in a distant window. He wonders if that person will help him. No help comes. One man stabs him in the heart and twists the knife. K dies like a dog. His last words, an expression of shame. The ending suggests that K could have resisted. He goes to his death cooperatively. He hopes for rescue, but does not fight. Some readers interpret this as critique. K is guilty of passivity, of failing to reject the court's legitimacy. Others see it as inevitable. Once you accept the premise that you must defend yourself, you have already lost. The trial was published after Kafka's death by Max Brod, who arranged the chapters, though scholars debate whether the order is correct. The novel has been read as prophecy, anticipating totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. But the novel is not only political. It captures something about modern consciousness itself. We live with the sense that we are being judged. We feel guilty without knowing what we have done wrong. Joseph K's mistake was accepting that he needed to answer the accusation at all. Metamorphosis, the self under pressure. Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning to discover he has become a monstrous insect. This transformation is presented as fact, not dream or hallucination. Gregor does not question whether it has actually happened. His first thoughts are about work. He has missed his train, his boss will be angry, he needs to get up and go to the office. The Metamorphosis was written in 1912, during 3 weeks in November. Kafka considered it one of his most successful works. It was published in 1915 in a literary magazine. The cover illustration showed a man opening a door with a horrified expression, but no insect was depicted. Kafka had specifically requested that the insect not be drawn. He wanted readers to imagine it themselves. The story operates on a simple premise. A man turns into a bug, but the transformation is not explained. There is no curse, no scientific accident, no magical cause. It simply happens. This refusal of explanation is crucial. Kafka is not interested in how Gregor became an insect. He is interested in what happens after. Gregor's family reacts with horror. His mother faints when she sees him. His father drives him back into his room with a stick and a newspaper. His sister Greta, initially sympathetic, brings him food and cleans his room, but she can barely look at him. The family locks him in. They speak about him as if he is not there or cannot understand them. Before his transformation, Gregor was the family's breadwinner. His father's business had failed years earlier. His mother has asthma. His sister is only 17. Gregor works as a traveling salesman, a job he hates, to pay off his parents' debts. The family depends entirely on his income. The transformation removes Gregor from his role. He cannot work. He cannot communicate. He cannot participate in family life. But the story makes clear that he was already alienated before he became an insect. His job required him to travel constantly. He had no friends. He lived with his family, but was isolated from them. The transformation makes visible what was already true. The family's reaction reveals their relationship to Gregor. They did not value him as a person. They valued what he provided. Once he cannot work, he becomes a burden. The father, who had claimed to be unable to work, suddenly finds employment. The mother and sister take in sewing and shop work. They discover they can survive without Gregor. His sacrifice was unnecessary. Greta stops cleaning Gregor's room regularly. She throws any old scraps in for him to eat. The room becomes filled with junk that the family does not want elsewhere. Gregor is treated as a disposal site. He still thinks and feels. He listens to the family's conversations. He worries about their financial situation. He wants to help, but he is completely powerless. The story examines what happens when a person loses their social utility. In modern society, identity is tied to function. You are what you do. A salesman, a student, a parent. These roles define you. Gregor's transformation strips away his role. What remains? A consciousness trapped in a repulsive body, unable to communicate or contribute. And once he cannot contribute, does he still deserve care? The family discusses what to do with Gregor. Greta suggests they must get rid of it. She no longer calls Gregor her brother. She refers to the insect as a thing. If it were Gregor, she argues, he would leave voluntarily to spare the family. The transformation from he to it is complete. Gregor has been linguistically erased. Gregor dies quietly one night. The cleaning woman discovers his body and sweeps it away. The family takes a day off and goes for a walk in the countryside. They discuss their prospects. They notice that Greta has become a beautiful young woman. They think about finding her a husband. No one mentions Gregor. He is already forgotten. The story is often read as an allegory for various conditions: chronic illness, disability, mental breakdown, depression. Each reading finds textual support. Gregor's transformation does resemble what happens when someone in a family becomes seriously ill or disabled. The initial sympathy, the gradual exhaustion of caregivers, the resentment, the wish that the person would just die so everyone could move on. But the story also works as an exploration of identity itself. What makes someone human? Is it their body, their ability to communicate, their social role, their consciousness? Gregor retains his human mind throughout the story. He thinks in complete sentences. He remembers his past. He has emotions. But no one treats him as human because he does not look human and cannot function in human society. Kafka understood the fragility of personhood. It depends on recognition by others. If others refuse to see you as a person, you cease to be one socially, even if you remain one subjectively. Gregor experiences this gap between his inner life and his outer existence. He is still himself, but the world has decided he is not. The insect body serves multiple symbolic functions. It represents the physical self as something alien and disgusting. It suggests animality, the non-human part of human nature. It evokes vulnerability. Insects can be easily crushed. It implies disgust. Vermin are what we exterminate without guilt. Kafka was deeply uncomfortable with his own body. His diaries record constant complaints about his physical weakness, his appearance, his digestive problems. He was self-conscious about eating in front of others. He practiced various health fads and diets. He felt his body was failing him, betraying him. The insect transformation literalizes this sense of bodily alienation. The story also reflects Kafka's relationship with his family. Like Gregor, he worked to support them while feeling utterly disconnected from them. His job at the Insurance Institute was boring and exhausting, but it provided security. His writing, his true vocation, had to be pursued in stolen hours late at night. He lived a double life, functionally present but spiritually absent. Gregor's room becomes his prison, but also his refuge. He discovers he enjoys crawling on the walls and ceiling. He finds comfort in hiding under the sofa. He is adapting to his new form. There are moments when the insect existence seems almost peaceful, freed from human responsibilities and expectations. But these moments are destroyed when the family intrudes. When Greta plays violin for the lodgers they have taken in, Gregor is drawn to the music. He emerges from his room, imagining himself bringing her to the conservatory to study properly. This fantasy reveals his continued human desires and his complete misunderstanding of his situation. He thinks he can still be a brother, still help, still participate. But his appearance causes chaos. The lodgers threaten to leave without paying. The family blames Gregor. It is after this incident that Greta declares they must get rid of him. The violence in the story is mostly passive. No one strikes Gregor except for his father throwing apples at him, one of which lodges in his back and causes an infection. But the family's neglect is its own form of violence. They stop feeding him properly. They leave his room dirty. They fill it with trash. They ignore his existence. This passive aggression kills him as surely as active abuse would. Kafka's genius in the Metamorphosis lies in his matter-of-fact tone. The story is told in simple, declarative sentences. There is no hysteria, no philosophical commentary. Events are described as they happen. This flatness makes the horror more effective. The extraordinary is treated as ordinary. A man is a bug, life goes on. The story ends with the family's relief and renewal. Gregor's death frees them. They have jobs now, they have prospects, the daughter is marriageable, the father has regained his authority, the mother is healthier, everything is better now that Gregor is gone. The story does not judge this reaction, it simply presents it. This is what happens. The burdensome family member dies and everyone is relieved. The Metamorphosis has remained continuously in print for over a century because it captures something universal about family dynamics, social worth, and human identity. Everyone has felt like Gregor at some point, alienated from others, trapped in circumstances beyond their control, reduced to a function rather than valued as a person, aware that if they stopped being useful, they would be discarded. The story offers no solution. Gregor does not transform back. There is no redemption. He simply suffers and dies. The world continues without him. The castle, searching for meaning and bureaucracy. Kay arrives in a village on a winter evening. He He has been hired as a land surveyor by the castle, the administrative center that governs the region, or so he believes. He seeks lodging at an inn and prepares to begin his work, but almost immediately, complications arise. A phone call is made to the castle to verify K.S status. The answer comes back that no land surveyor is expected. K insists there has been a mistake. Another call is made. This time the castle confirms that yes, a land surveyor was indeed hired. K can stay, but he cannot actually reach the castle to begin his work. The Castle was Kafka's last novel, written between 1922 and 1923 while he was dying of tuberculosis. Like The Trial, he never finished it. The manuscript breaks off mid-sentence. Max Brod published it in 1926, 2 years after Kafka's death. The novel is longer than The Trial and more complex in its structure. It is also more explicitly comic, though the comedy is dark. The castle sits on a hill above the village. K can see it from where he stands. It is not particularly impressive, just a collection of buildings. It should be reachable by a simple walk up the hill, but every time K tries to approach it, he finds himself walking in circles, ending up back where he started. The paths do not lead where they appear to lead. The geography itself seems to resist him. K is assigned 2 assistants, Arthur and Jeremias. They claim to be his old assistants from previous surveying jobs. K has never seen them before. They are useless, providing no actual assistance. They follow him everywhere, interfering with his activities. They seem to serve no purpose except to observe and obstruct him. The village operates entirely according to the castle's dictates. Every aspect of life is regulated. Permits are required for everything. Officials must approve all activities. But the officials are invisible. They communicate through intermediaries. They send letters that arrive late or not at all. The bureaucratic system is total but incomprehensible. K seeks an audience with Clam, the official who supposedly hired him. Clam is never available. He stays at the inn sometimes but cannot be disturbed. K waits in hallways hoping to catch him. He plots elaborate schemes to intercept him. Nothing works. Clam remains inaccessible, more concept than person. Frida works as a barmaid at the inn. She's Clam's mistress, or was. K seduces her, partly out of attraction, but mostly because he thinks her connection to Clam will help him reach the official. They become engaged, but Frida eventually realizes K is using her and leaves him. K.S personal relationships are instrumental. He sees people as means to reach the castle. The village is populated by characters who explain the system to K. Each explanation contradicts the others. One person tells him he must be patient and wait for summons from the castle. Another says he must be aggressive and demand his rights. A third suggests the whole idea of working as a land surveyor was a misunderstanding and he should give up. K receives no consistent guidance. Barnabas serves as a messenger between K and the castle. He delivers letters from officials to K and supposedly carries K.S responses back. But Barnabas admits he is not actually an official messenger. He is just a villager who sometimes brings messages. He has no authority. He does not know if his messages reach their intended recipients. His family has been trying for years to rehabilitate their reputation after an offense against the castle. They have made no progress. The novel explores the experience of dealing with bureaucratic systems. Anyone who has tried to resolve an issue with a large organization will recognize K.S frustration. You call one department and they refer you to another. You submit forms that disappear. You receive contradictory information. No one takes responsibility. The system operates according to rules no one can explain. But The Castle is not simply social satire. The castle represents something beyond bureaucracy. It stands for meaning itself, or the source of meaning. K is trying to find his place in the world, to understand his purpose, to gain recognition. The castle is the authority that can grant this, but the authority remains forever out of reach. K.S identity depends on his position as land surveyor. Without official confirmation of this role, he is no one. He is a stranger in the village, tolerated but not accepted. The villagers treat him with suspicion. He has no legitimate reason to be there if he is not the land surveyor. His entire existence depends on bureaucratic validation that never quite arrives. The letters K receives from the castle are masterpieces of ambiguity. They acknowledge him in vague terms. They reference his services. They mention his surveying work. But they provide no specific instructions. They do not clarify his status. They are simultaneously encouraging and meaningless. He can read anything into them or nothing at all. Kafka understood that modern identity is bureaucratic. You are who your papers say you are, your passport, your employment contract, your identification documents. These pieces of paper define you socially. Without them, you have no legal existence. K lacks the proper documentation. He exists in a liminal state, neither fully present nor fully absent. The castle's power derives from its opacity. If K could simply speak with someone in authority and get a clear answer, the problem would be solved one way or another. But he cannot. The system denies him direct access to power. He must work through intermediaries, wait for responses, interpret ambiguous signals. This process exhausts him and wastes his time without resolving anything. The villagers have adapted to this system. They accept that the castle is unreachable. They do not question its decisions. They perform their assigned roles without seeking explanation or advancement. K.'s arrival disturbs this equilibrium. He asks questions. He demands clarity. He refuses to accept the situation. The villagers see this as naive or dangerous. Olga, Barnabas's sister, tells Kay the story of her family's fall. Years ago, her sister Amalia rejected the sexual advances of an official named Sortini. For this offense, the family was ostracized. No official punishment was announced. No decree was issued. But everyone understood the family was in disgrace. No one would do business with them. They were treated as pariahs. Amalia's refusal to submit to sexual exploitation resulted in collective punishment that continues indefinitely. This story reveals how the castle's power operates. It does not need to issue formal sentences. Social pressure and collective understanding suffice. Everyone knows what the castle wants. Everyone enforces its will without being told to do so. The system is maintained by the villagers themselves, who internalize and execute its logic. Kay is offered a job as school janitor. This would give him legitimate reason to stay in the village, but it would mean abandoning his identity as land surveyor. He would become something else, something lesser. He refuses at first, seeing it as defeat. Eventually he accepts, recognizing he has no other option. But even this position is provisional, subject to approval from the castle that may never come. The novel has been interpreted in religious terms. The castle is God, or the divine order. K is the seeker, trying to find grace or understanding. The inaccessibility of the castle reflects the hiddenness of God in modern life. The bureaucratic machinery is the degraded form that religious hierarchy has taken. Faith becomes form-filling. Salvation becomes proper documentation. But the novel works equally well as pure satire of bureaucracy. Kafka spent his entire working life in an insurance institute. He knew how organizations function in practice versus theory. He observed how power protects itself through layers of process. He understood that bureaucracies exist primarily to perpetuate themselves, not to achieve their stated goals. Kafka left notes about how the novel might have ended. According to Max Brod, Kafka said that K would receive news of his acceptance by the castle just as he was dying from exhaustion. The permission he sought would arrive too late to do any good. This ending would have completed the pattern. The system acknowledges you only when acknowledgement no longer matters. K.'s tragedy is that he takes the system seriously. He believes that if he follows the right procedures, he will eventually succeed. The villagers know better. They understand the system is not rational. K cannot accept this. He needs to believe his efforts matter. Alienation and Modern Man. Kafka's characters exist in a state of fundamental disconnection. They are separated from other people, from society, from their own bodies, from any sense of meaning or purpose. This alienation is not a temporary condition that might be overcome. It is the permanent state of modern existence. In the Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa is alienated before his transformation. He works a job he hates to support a family he barely communicates with. He travels constantly, spending nights in strange hotels. He has no friends, no hobbies, no inner life we can see. The transformation into an insect makes his alienation visible. He was already cut off from human connection. Now his body reflects this truth. Joseph K., in the trial, is similarly isolated. He lives in a boarding house, not a home. He has colleagues but not friends. He has casual, sexual relationships but no intimacy. When he is arrested, no one really cares. His uncle shows up briefly, worried about family reputation. But Joseph K. faces his trial alone. No one can help him because no one truly knows him. K, in the castle, is the stranger, the outsider by definition. He arrives in a village where everyone else belongs. He tries to establish himself, to gain recognition, to become part of the community. But he remains always apart. The villagers see him as an intruder. His relationships are transactional. He uses people to try to reach the castle. They use him for their own purposes. No genuine connection forms. Kafka's protagonists are typically single men living in rented rooms. They work jobs that do not fulfill them. They have no families of their own. They exist in a state of suspended adulthood. They have left their childhood homes but have not created new roots. They drift through life without purpose or direction. This reflects the modern urban experience. In traditional societies, people lived in communities where everyone knew everyone. Your identity was given by birth. Your role was predetermined. Your place in the social order was clear. This system was oppressive in many ways, but it provided belonging. Modern industrial society dissolved these bonds. People moved to cities for work. They lived among strangers. They worked in factories and offices with people they did not know. They existed anonymously in crowds. The old structures of meaning, family, church, village lost their power. Nothing replaced them. Kafka lived this experience directly. Prague in his time was undergoing rapid industrialization. The population grew, traditional Jewish communities were breaking apart, young people were leaving religious observance. They spoke German instead of Yiddish or Czech. They pursued secular education and professional careers, but they did not fully belong to the German or Czech communities either. They existed between worlds. Kafka himself was the perfect example of this in-between state. Too secular for religious Jews, too Jewish for secular Germans, too German for Czechs, too Czech for Germans. He belonged nowhere completely. His work at the Insurance Institute was respectable but meaningless to him. His true vocation as a writer had no social recognition. He lived with his parents but desperately wanted to leave. He could not marry and establish his own home. He was stuck. The alienation Kafka depicts is not just social but existential. His characters do not understand why they exist. They have no clear purpose. They perform their duties but feel no connection to them. They go through the motions of life without experiencing it as meaningful. This lack of meaning is distinctly modern. In religious frameworks, life has purpose given by God. You exist to serve the divine, to prepare for the afterlife, to fulfill your role in the cosmic order. Suffering makes sense within this framework. It is a test, a punishment for sin, a path to redemption. But Kafka's world is post-religious. God is absent. The divine order is represented by bureaucratic systems like the court and the castle, which are indifferent and incomprehensible. There is no cosmic justice. There is only process, endless and meaningless. Suffering serves no purpose, it simply is. The alienation extends to language itself. Kafka's characters struggle to communicate. They speak but are not understood. They listen but do not comprehend. The gap between what is said and what is meant cannot be bridged. Words fail to convey experience. This is why so much remains unspoken in Kafka's work. The most important things cannot be expressed. In The Judgment, Georg Bendemann tries to explain himself to his father. He fails. The father misinterprets everything. Communication breaks down into accusation and submission. In the Metamorphosis, Gregor tries to speak but produces only insect sounds. His family cannot understand him. He can understand them, but they do not know this. The one-way communication highlights his isolation. Kafka was acutely aware of the limits of language. He wrote constantly, novels, stories, letters, diary entries, but he never felt he had expressed what he needed to express. He burned many of his manuscripts. He left his novels unfinished. He instructed Max Brod to destroy everything unpublished. Language was inadequate to his task. The alienation in Kafka's work is also bodily. His characters are uncomfortable in their physical forms. They experience their bodies as obstacles or prisons. Gregor's insect body is the extreme case, but even the human characters seem detached from their physical selves. They describe their bodies from outside as objects that happen to belong to them. This reflects Kafka's own relationship to his body. He was thin, weak, and frequently ill. He felt his body betrayed him. He tried various health regimes, vegetarianism, exercise, fresh air, nothing worked. He developed tuberculosis, a disease that slowly destroyed him from within. His body became the site of his death, consuming itself. Kafka's characters also experience time in an alienated way. They wait endlessly for things that never happen. Joseph K. waits for his trial. K. waits to reach the castle. The man in the parable waits at the door to the law. Time passes, but nothing progresses. Life is consumed in waiting, which is not really living. Modern life often feels this way. We wait for the bus, wait in line, wait for responses to emails, wait for approval, wait for conditions to be right to start really living. But the conditions never come. Life is the waiting, not what comes after. Kafka understood this. His characters wait their whole lives. They die still waiting. The alienation Kafka depicts has no solution within his work. His characters do not overcome their isolation. They do not find community or meaning or purpose. They do not reconnect with themselves or others. They simply endure their alienation until they die. This bleakness is Kafka's honesty. He offers no false hope. Some readers find Kafka's work depressing for this reason. It presents a vision of life as fundamentally empty and disconnected, but others find it strangely comforting. Kafka articulates an experience many people feel but cannot express. Reading him, they feel less alone. Someone else has experienced this alienation and made art from it. This creates a paradoxical connection through the depiction of disconnection. The modern world has only intensified the alienation Kafka described. We communicate constantly through screens, but rarely face to face. We accumulate hundreds of online connections, but have few real friends. We work in global organizations where we never meet our colleagues. We live in cities surrounded by millions of people and feel completely alone. Kafka saw all this coming and predicted the administrative state where life would be governed by forms and procedures rather than human judgment. The absurd before Camus, Kafka's universe. Albert Camus published The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942, nearly 2 decades after Kafka's death. The essay established Camus as a philosopher of the absurd, but Kafka had already mapped this territory in fiction. His novels and stories present a universe where human beings seek meaning in a world that offers none. The absurd, as Camus defined it, arises from the confrontation between human need for meaning and the world's unreasonable silence. People want their lives to make sense. They want their actions to matter. They want justice, purpose, coherence. But the universe does not care about these desires. It operates according to laws that have nothing to do with human values. This gap between what we want and what we get is the absurd. Kafka's work is built on this gap. His characters want simple things. Joseph K. wants to know what crime he is accused of. K. wants to work as a land surveyor. Gregor Samsa wants to support his family and be left alone. None of these desires are granted. The world does not cooperate. It operates according to rules the characters cannot understand. Their reasonable expectations are met with unreasonable responses. But Kafka goes further than simple frustration or bad luck. His worlds are fundamentally irrational. They have the appearance of order. There are courts, castles, hierarchies, procedures. But these systems do not function according to any logic the characters can discover. The appearance of order masks fundamental chaos. In the trial, there is a legal system. There are judges, lawyers, courts, procedures. But none of it works the way legal systems are supposed to work. Charges are not specified, trials are not scheduled, evidence is not presented, defense is not possible. Yet the system continues to operate, and everyone treats it as legitimate. The form of law exists without the substance. This is absurd in the technical sense. The system claims to deliver justice. It has all the mechanisms justice requires, but it does not actually deliver justice. The gap between appearance and reality is total. Joseph K. expects that if he engages with the system properly, he will be exonerated. But the system is not designed to exonerate or convict based on guilt or innocence. It simply processes people. Camus argued that recognizing the absurd is the beginning of wisdom. Once you understand that the universe is indifferent to human meaning, you can stop waiting for it to provide meaning. You can create your own. This is the lesson of Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever. The task is meaningless, but Sisyphus can choose to embrace it. Camus imagines Sisyphus happy. Kafka's characters never reach this acceptance. They cannot stop seeking meaning from external sources. Joseph K. cannot give up on his trial. K. cannot abandon his quest to reach the castle. They need validation from the system. Without it, they have no identity, no purpose, no worth. They cannot simply create their own meaning because they do not believe they have that authority. This is the deeper absurdity in Kafka. Not only does the world fail to provide meaning, but human beings cannot generate meaning independently. They need recognition from power structures. They need official approval. They need to be told they matter. But the power structures are empty. There is no one behind the curtain. The castle is just buildings. The court is just corridors and offices. There is no ultimate authority to provide the validation they seek. The religious dimension of this becomes clear. In traditional religious frameworks, God provides meaning. Human life matters because God cares about it. Moral laws are grounded in divine will. Suffering has purpose within a cosmic plan. The universe is not indifferent because God watches over it. But Kafka's universe is post-religious. The old religious structures remain as empty forms. The castle resembles a church hierarchy. The court resembles divine judgment. But there is no God behind these institutions. They are purely human constructions, operated by corrupt and incompetent functionaries. They claim absolute authority but have no legitimate basis for their claims. This is more disturbing than simple atheism. If there is no God, at least that is clear. You know you must create your own meaning. But in Kafka's world, the structures that claim to embody divine authority still exist and still demand obedience. You cannot simply dismiss them because they exert real power, but you also cannot trust them to be just or rational. You are trapped in a system that claims to represent ultimate meaning but actually represents nothing. Kafka read Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who explored the absurdity of religious faith. Kierkegaard argued that faith requires a leap beyond reason. Abraham is commanded to sacrifice Isaac. This makes no sense rationally or morally. Abraham must choose to obey despite the absurdity. Faith exists in the tension between reason and revelation. Kafka admired Kierkegaard but could not make the leap of faith. He was drawn to Judaism but could not practice it with conviction. He studied Hebrew late in life and considered moving to Palestine, but he remained fundamentally doubtful. He wanted to believe but could not. He was stuck in the absurdity without resolution. This position appears in his work. His characters exist in a universe that seems to operate according to some higher logic. The court must have reasons for its accusations. The castle must have a purpose for its regulations. There must be a plan, a meaning, a justice. But this meaning is never revealed. The characters wait for it like the man at the door to the law. They spend their lives in anticipation of understanding that never comes. The parable Before the Law captures this perfectly. A man seeks entry to the law. A doorkeeper guards the entrance. The doorkeeper does not forbid entry explicitly. He just suggests the man should wait, maybe later. The man waits. Years pass. He grows old. Finally, dying, he asks why no one else has sought entry through this door. The doorkeeper responds that this door was meant only for him, and now it will be closed. The absurdity is multi-layered. The man could have entered at any time. The doorkeeper did not stop him. But the man internalized the prohibition. He created his own obstacle. Yet the doorkeeper's final statement suggests there was something special about this door, some meaning to the man's waiting. But what meaning? We cannot know. The parable offers no resolution, only layers of interpretation that contradict each other. Kafka's parables often work this way. They seem to point toward a meaning. They have the structure of allegory. But the allegorical meaning remains unclear. You can interpret them in multiple ways. Each interpretation seems plausible, but they contradict each other. The parable frustrates the search for meaning even as it invites it. Existentialist philosophers like Sartre and Camus argued that recognizing the absurd is liberating. If there is no inherent meaning, then we are free to create meaning. We are not bound by cosmic laws or divine commands. We can choose our values, define our purposes, create ourselves. This freedom is terrifying, but it is also empowering. Kafka's characters do not experience this liberation. They cannot choose their own values because they do not believe they have authority to do so. They need permission. They need validation. They need someone in authority to tell them they are allowed to exist, allowed to work, allowed to be themselves. But permission never comes. They wait forever for an authorization that would free them to live. But the waiting consumes their lives. The absurd in Kafka is not just philosophical, but emotional. His characters experience constant anxiety. They never know if they are doing the right thing. They receive contradictory information. They make efforts that lead nowhere. They try to understand situations that are fundamentally incomprehensible. This produces a state of permanent unease. Modern life produces this same anxiety. We live in complex systems we do not understand. Economic forces beyond our control determine our prospects. Political decisions made by distant authorities affect our lives. We are subject to powers we cannot access or comprehend. We try to follow the rules, but the rules are unclear and constantly changing. Kafka saw that modern rationalization produces irrationality. The more complex systems become, the less comprehensible they are. The bureaucratic structures meant to provide order actually generate confusion. Kafka's literature makes the absurd visible. He strips away the rationalizations we use to convince ourselves the world makes sense. The question is what to do with this recognition. Kafka never reaches a conclusion. His characters are not happy. They suffer their absurd situations without resolution. But perhaps Kafka's honesty is itself a form of courage. Powerless in the Machine, Kafka and Bureaucracy. Franz Kafka spent 14 years working for the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute in Prague. He started in 1908 at age 25. He remained until 1922 when his tuberculosis forced him to retire. For most of his adult life, he was a bureaucrat. He wrote reports, assessed claims, attended meetings, and followed procedures. He knew bureaucracy from the inside. The Insurance Institute was a semi-governmental organization. It provided compensation to workers injured on the job. In theory, this was progressive social policy. Workers who lost limbs or became disabled would receive payments. Employers paid premiums based on the danger level of their industries. The system was meant to protect workers and incentivize workplace safety. In practice, the system was complicated and often arbitrary. Determining which accidents qualified for compensation required judgment. Assessing the degree of disability was subjective. Employers fought to lower their premium classifications. Workers struggled to prove their injuries were work-related. Kafka spent his days navigating these conflicts. He was apparently good at his job. He received promotions and salary increases. His reports were clear and well-reasoned. Colleagues respected him. He developed expertise in accident prevention and workplace safety. But his letters and diaries reveal his true feelings. He hated the job. He resented every hour it took from his writing. He felt the office was draining his life force. He called it torture. He dreamed constantly of quitting, of finding a way to write full-time, but he never did. This contradiction defined his life. The institution that enabled his survival also prevented his flourishing. Without the job, he could not afford to live independently or support himself as a writer. With the job, he had no time or energy to write as much as he needed to. He was trapped in a system that was simultaneously necessary and destructive. Kafka's fiction transforms this bureaucratic experience into nightmare. The insurance institute becomes the court in the trial. The hierarchy of officials becomes the castle. The endless procedures become labyrinths with no exit. But the transformation is not as extreme as it seems. Kafka is not exaggerating bureaucracy beyond recognition. He is revealing its essential nature. Bureaucracies function through division of labor. Each person has a specific role with defined responsibilities. No single person understands the entire system. This specialization is supposed to create efficiency. But it also creates fragmentation. No one takes responsibility for outcomes. Everyone is just following their part of the procedure. When something goes wrong in a bureaucracy, it is nearly impossible to fix. You speak with one person who refers you to another. That person says the issue is actually handled by a third department. You go there and are told you need forms from the first person. You have entered a loop with no exit. Everyone is helpful individually, but the system produces no results. This is Joseph K.'s experience in the trial. Everyone he speaks with has some connection to the court. They offer advice, suggest strategies, explain procedures, but nothing actually happens. His case does not progress. He never gets closer to understanding the accusation or mounting a defense. The system absorbs his energy while producing nothing. K.'s experience in the castle is similar. He is told to wait for messages from the castle. Messages arrive, but they are ambiguous. He seeks clarification. He's told to submit requests through proper channels. He does so. Nothing happens. He tries different approaches. Each seems promising initially. Each leads nowhere. The genius of Kafka's depiction is that the bureaucrats are not malicious. They are not consciously obstructing K or Joseph K. They are just doing their jobs. They follow procedures. They work within their authority. They cannot help with matters outside their jurisdiction. The obstruction is built into the structure itself, not into individual ill will. This makes bureaucratic power different from personal tyranny. A tyrant can be overthrown. A corrupt official can be exposed. But how do you fight a system where everyone is just following the rules? The system itself is the problem, but the system is maintained by thousands of individuals who are each just doing their assigned task. Max Weber, the German sociologist who was Kafka's contemporary, analyzed bureaucracy extensively. Weber saw bureaucracy as the defining feature of modern society. It represented the rationalization of social life. But Weber also recognized the dangers. He called bureaucracy an iron cage. Once established, bureaucratic systems are nearly impossible to change. They develop their own momentum. They prioritize their own perpetuation over their stated goals. Kafka intuited everything Weber analyzed but experienced it emotionally rather than intellectually. He felt the weight of bureaucracy on his soul. He experienced the frustration of systems that claim rationality but produce irrationality. He understood that bureaucracy reduces human beings to cases, files, numbers. In the Metamorphosis, Gregor's first thought after his transformation is about work. He has missed his train. His boss will be angry. He must get to the office. Even though he has become an insect, he still thinks like an employee. His identity is so bound to his work role that he cannot imagine simply not going. The bureaucratic mindset has colonized his consciousness. When the chief clerk arrives to check on Gregor's absence, Gregor tries to explain. He promises he will come to work immediately. He begs not to be fired, but he can only make insect sounds. The chief clerk flees in horror. The bureaucratic relationship allows no flexibility. Gregor cannot work, so Gregor must be dismissed. His years of service mean nothing. He is instantly replaceable. This reflects the reality of employment in modern organizations. You are valued for your function, not for yourself. When you can no longer perform the function, you cease to have value. The organization does not hate you. It simply has no use for you. This is presented as rationality. Nothing personal, just business. But it reduces human beings to their instrumental utility. Kafka saw how bureaucracy spreads beyond offices and government agencies. It becomes a way of thinking, a mode of relating to the world. Bureaucratic rationality values documentation over experience, procedure over judgment, consistency over appropriateness. Everything must be recorded, filed, processed through proper channels. In the trial, written documents have mystical power. The court keeps records. Officials read files. Lawyers submit petitions. But no one actually knows what is in these documents. They are referenced constantly, but never directly accessed. They exist in a realm beyond ordinary reality, yet they determine fates. Joseph K. is probably described in some file somewhere. That description may be completely wrong, but it is official and therefore true. This captures something real about how power operates through documentation. What is written down becomes reality. Your credit score defines your financial trustworthiness regardless of the complexity of your actual situation. Your medical records define your health status regardless of how you feel. Your performance review defines your competence regardless of the full reality of your work. The document becomes more real than the reality it supposedly describes. Bureaucracies also create their own language. Every field has jargon, specialized terms that outsiders cannot understand. This is sometimes necessary for precision, but it also functions as exclusion. If you do not understand the language, you cannot participate in the system. You are dependent on experts to translate for you. This creates asymmetric power. Kafka's characters constantly struggle with language. They do not understand the terms being used. They ask for explanations. The explanations are provided in the same incomprehensible language. Legal terms, administrative categories, official designations. None of it means anything to the ordinary person. Yet these terms have real consequences. The proliferation of forms is itself a tool of bureaucratic control. Before you can do anything, you must fill out forms. The forms ask questions you cannot answer without information you do not have. They require documentation you do not possess. You must go to other offices to get the required documents. Those offices require their own forms. You spend days or weeks gathering paperwork before you can even submit your initial request. This process serves no clear purpose except to exhaust people. Many will give up rather than complete all the requirements. This filters out everyone except those with time, resources, and persistence. The bureaucracy protects itself from too many demands by making demands impossibly burdensome. K in the castle faces endless procedural obstacles. He needs permission to stay in the village. But getting permission requires confirming his employment. Confirming his employment requires reaching the castle. Reaching the castle requires permission to approach. Each requirement creates another requirement. The chain of prerequisites is infinite. This is not unique to fiction. Real bureaucracies create similar situations. You need a job to rent an apartment, but you need an apartment to get a job. You need identification to get identification. You need money to prove you do not need money. The system creates logical impossibilities that trap people in limbo. Kafka also understood how bureaucracies resist change. Any organization develops standard procedures. These procedures become embedded in culture, technology, and habit. Changing them requires coordinating many people across different departments. Each has incentive to keep doing things the familiar way, so even obviously dysfunctional procedures persist for decades. Moreover, bureaucracies tend to expand. They create new positions, new departments, new regulations. Each addition makes the system more complex. Complexity requires more administration. More administration requires more positions. The organization grows even if its actual work does not increase. It becomes primarily concerned with managing itself. Kafka was complicit in this system. He was not just a victim of bureaucracy. He was a bureaucrat. He wrote the reports, followed the procedures, advanced through the hierarchy. He was part of the machine. This dual position, inside and outside, perpetrator and victim, gave him unique insight. He understood bureaucracy both as structure and as lived experience. His fiction reflects this double consciousness. His protagonists are not revolutionary outsiders fighting the system. They are ordinary people trying to navigate it. They want to comply. They want to understand the rules and follow them. They accept the system's legitimacy even as it destroys them. They are complicit in their own oppression. This is perhaps Kafka's darkest insight. We cannot simply blame bureaucracy as an external force. We internalize bureaucratic rationality, we accept its categories, we adopt its language, we measure ourselves according to its standards. The bureaucracy exists not just in buildings and procedures, but in our own minds. We become our own administrators, filing ourselves into appropriate categories, monitoring ourselves for compliance. Modern life has only intensified this bureaucratization. We navigate multiple systems daily: healthcare, education, finance, legal, governmental. Each has its own procedures, its own forms, its own language. Each reduces us to data points. Each requires us to present ourselves in standardized formats that do not capture our reality. Technology has not reduced bureaucracy. It has made it more pervasive. Automated systems are bureaucracy without humans. They follow procedures absolutely. They cannot exercise judgment. They cannot make exceptions. When something goes wrong, there is no one to appeal to. The system is the system. We fill out endless online forms. We navigate automated phone trees. We receive emails generated by algorithms. We are assessed by systems we cannot see or understand. Our loan applications are approved or denied by models we cannot interrogate. We are processed by machines according to rules we did not agree to and cannot change. Kafka anticipated this world and saw that modern society was moving toward total administration. Every aspect of life would be regulated, documented, processed through proper channels. The body in crisis, illness and identity. In August 1917, Franz Kafka woke in the middle of the night coughing blood. He was 34 years old. He called a doctor. The diagnosis was tuberculosis. In that era, tuberculosis was often a death sentence. There were no antibiotics. Treatment consisted of rest, fresh air, and nutrition. Some people recovered, many did not. The disease would kill Kafka 7 years later. The tuberculosis was not entirely unwelcome. Kafka had been engaged to Felice Bauer for the second time. The engagement tormented him. He wanted intimacy but feared it. The illness gave him an escape. He could break the engagement for medical reasons. He could present himself as doing Felice a favor by releasing her from the obligation to marry a sick man. He spent time in sanitaria in the countryside. He lived with his sister Otla in the village of Zurau. He took leave from his job. The illness gave him time to write and think without the guilt of neglecting his responsibilities. He was dying, which was terrible, but he was also free, which was necessary. Kafka's relationship to his illness was complex. He sometimes spoke of it as punishment. His body was revolting against the life he had forced it to live. The years of late-night writing, poor sleep, stress, and anxiety had damaged him. The tuberculosis was his body's protest. But he also spoke of the illness as truth. His body was expressing what his conscious mind could not. He had always felt weak, inadequate, wrong. Now his body was manifestly failing. The body appears constantly in Kafka's writing, and it is almost always in crisis. Bodies transform into insects. Bodies are wounded by apples thrown by fathers. Bodies are stabbed by executioners. Bodies waste away from neglect. Bodies are objects of disgust. They leak, they decay, they betray. They are never comfortable homes for consciousness. Gregor Samsa wakes up in an alien body. He has multiple legs that do not coordinate properly. He has a hard shell that makes lying in his usual position impossible. He discovers he can climb walls, but the adhesive secretion is unpleasant. He finds rotting food appealing, but fresh food disgusting. His body has become something he must learn to operate, something strange and disturbing. The metamorphosis is never explained, but it reads like sudden disability or disfigurement. One day you are functioning normally, the next day your body does not work. You cannot do the things you did yesterday. You cannot participate in normal life. Your family must care for you, but they find your body disturbing. You have become a burden, a source of revulsion, something to be hidden away. Kafka knew about bodies that fail. His father was robust and physical. Kafka was thin and weak. He tried various physical fitness regimes. He swam, did exercises, spent time outdoors. Nothing made him strong. He remained frail. His body would not conform to his will or his father's expectations. He was also deeply uncomfortable with sexuality. He visited prostitutes occasionally, but found the experience degrading. He had relationships with women, but struggled with physical intimacy. His diaries record anxiety about masturbation. He felt it was shameful, weakening. His body had desires he could not control. This lack of control disturbed him. In the trial, Joseph K. S. body is mostly absent. He is a thinking, acting agent without much physical presence. But in the execution scene, his body becomes central. He is walked to the quarry. He is laid on the ground. A knife is passed over him. He is stabbed. His body, which he has ignored throughout the novel, becomes the site of his death. In the penal colony is Kafka's most graphic exploration of bodily punishment. An elaborate machine is designed to write the prisoner's crime on his body with needles. The process takes 12 hours and ends in death. The officer who operates the machine explains it lovingly. The prisoner learns his crime through his body. Knowledge and punishment are inscribed in flesh. The story was written in 1914 before Kafka's tuberculosis diagnosis, but it anticipates his later experience. Illness would write itself on his body. The disease would mark him, transform him, eventually kill him. His body would become the text on which his fate was written. Tuberculosis in the early 20th century had cultural meanings beyond its medical reality. It was associated with artists and intellectuals. It was romanticized as a disease of sensitivity and refinement. There was an idea that creative people burned too intensely and consumed themselves. Kafka did not romanticize his illness. He described it clinically in letters. He tracked his symptoms. He discussed treatments. But he also recognized it as meaningful. His body was telling him something. Some biographers have speculated that Kafka's illness was psychosomatic in origin. The conflict between his job and his writing, his inability to marry, his difficult relationship with his father, all this stress could have weakened his immune system. In his later years, the tuberculosis spread to Kafka's larynx. He could barely speak. He communicated by writing notes. This was cruelly appropriate for a writer. His voice was taken, but he still had words on paper. Yet even this became difficult. His throat hurt too much to swallow. He was starving because eating caused pain. His body was shutting down. Dora Diamant, his companion in the final year, tried to care for him. She read to him. She helped him communicate. She watched him waste away. Kafka was reduced to pure body, pure suffering. There was no escape into mind or art, just the physical reality of dying. The body in Kafka's work is never neutral. It is a site of transformation, punishment, decay, and alienation. Characters are uncomfortable in their bodies. They cannot control them. They cannot make them do what they should. The body is an obstacle to be managed, a source of shame, a limitation on the will. This reflects a broader modern anxiety. Modern life emphasizes mind over body. We sit at desks. We value intellectual work. We try to transcend physical limitations through technology. This creates alienation from our own bodies. We experience them as things we possess rather than things we are. Modern medicine intensifies this alienation. Bodies become collections of systems and organs. Doctors treat specific conditions rather than whole persons. Medical imaging makes our insides visible to others, but not to ourselves. We depend on experts to tell us what is happening in our own bodies. Kafka experienced this medical objectification. He saw doctors, he underwent examinations, he followed treatments. His body became a medical case, something to be diagnosed and managed. He was both subject and object, the person experiencing illness and the body being treated. The tuberculosis also changed his social identity. He was now a sick person. People treated him differently. They were solicitous, but also kept their distance. Tuberculosis was contagious. He was dangerous to others. He had to isolate himself. The illness made him literally untouchable. This social dimension of illness appears in the Metamorphosis. Gregor's family is horrified by his transformed body. They cannot touch him. They can barely look at him. He is isolated in his room. The transformation creates physical and social quarantine. He is cut off from human contact. His body makes him unfit for society. There is also the question of agency. Did Gregor choose to become an insect? The story does not say. The transformation simply happens. But there is a sense in which it might be unconscious choice. Gregor was trapped in a life he hated. The transformation solves this problem. He cannot work. He is released from his obligations. But the price is his humanity. Similarly, Kafka's tuberculosis released him from his obligations. He could leave his job. He could break his engagement. He could stop trying to satisfy his father. He was dying, which was terrible. But he was also free, which he had always wanted. The body in crisis reveals what was hidden. Gregor's transformation makes visible his alienation from his family. Kafka's tuberculosis made visible his psychological distress. Illness strips away the social performance. It reveals the raw reality beneath. You cannot pretend to be fine when you are coughing blood. This is why illness is both honest and cruel. It tells the truth about your condition, but it does so in a language of pain and limitation. The body speaks, but what it says is usually just "I hurt" or "I cannot." It does not provide solutions, it just insists on being acknowledged. Kafka acknowledged his body in his writing. He made it central. He showed bodies transforming, suffering, failing. He refused to pretend that consciousness is independent of flesh. We are embodied beings. Our bodies limit us, define us, betray us, and ultimately kill us. This is not punishment, it is simply reality. In the end, his body killed him. The tuberculosis destroyed his throat. He could not eat. He starved. He was 40 years old. His writing was not finished, but perhaps the body was never the problem. Perhaps the problem was the expectation that the body should serve the mind perfectly. Kafka's work suggests that we need a different relationship with our bodies. Not control but acceptance. Not transcendence but integration. Jewish identity in a hostile world. Franz Kafka was born into a Jewish family in Prague, a city where Jews constituted roughly 7% of the population. But to describe Kafka simply as Jewish requires qualification. What did being Jewish mean in Prague in the late 19th and early 20th centuries? The answer is complicated. Kafka's father Hermann came from a small village where Jews spoke Yiddish and practiced traditional Judaism. Hermann abandoned most of this when he moved to Prague. He learned German. He built a business. He assimilated into urban bourgeois life. He attended synagogue a few times a year on major holidays, but this was social obligation rather than religious conviction. Franz grew up in this assimilated environment. He spoke German as his native language. He attended German schools. He had a secular education. His knowledge of Judaism was superficial. He did not read Hebrew. He knew little about Jewish law or tradition. His bar mitzvah was a formality, not a spiritual awakening. Yet he was unmistakably Jewish in the eyes of others. His name was Jewish. His family was Jewish. In a society organized by ethnic and religious categories, he could not escape this classification. He was a German-speaking Jew, which placed him in a peculiar position. Prague's population was divided into three main groups. The Czech majority spoke Czech and increasingly asserted nationalist claims. The German minority, which had long dominated culturally and politically, spoke German and identified with German culture. Jews were caught between these groups. Most Prague Jews spoke German. This aligned them with the German minority. But they were not fully accepted by ethnic Germans, who often held anti-Semitic views. Czechs saw German-speaking Jews as allies of German cultural dominance. Jews who tried to assimilate into Czech culture were not always welcome there either. They belonged fully to neither community. Kafka experienced this triple alienation directly. He was Jewish among Germans, German among Czechs, and secular among Jews. He fit nowhere completely. His friend Max Brod was more actively engaged with Jewish culture and Zionism. Kafka admired this engagement but could not fully participate. He felt he lacked authentic connection to Jewish tradition. In his famous letter to his father, Kafka describes his father's Judaism as empty performance. Hermann went to synagogue 4 days a year, sat through services impatiently, then treated the religious obligation as discharged. He followed no Jewish practices at home. He showed no interest in Jewish learning. His Judaism was cultural identity without content. This hollowness disturbed Kafka. He recognized that his father had maintained Jewish identity while abandoning Jewish substance. The form persisted without meaning. Kafka inherited this empty form. He was Jewish by designation, but did not know what that meant. He was labeled without instruction, categorized without understanding. Anti-Semitism was a constant presence in Prague. It existed in casual remarks, social exclusion, and periodic violence. In 1897, when Kafka was 14, anti-Jewish riots broke out in Prague. Mobs attacked Jewish businesses and homes. The violence lasted several days. Kafka witnessed this hatred directed at people like himself for no reason except their Jewish identity. The rise of racial anti-Semitism in the late 19th century made Jewish identity inescapable. Earlier, anti-Semitism was religious. Jews could convert to Christianity and be accepted. But racial anti-Semitism defined Jewishness as biological and therefore permanent. Conversion changed nothing. Jews were Jews regardless of their beliefs or practices. This made assimilation impossible. Kafka lived in this impossible situation. He had assimilated culturally but remained Jewish racially. He did not practice Judaism but was identified as Jewish by others. He could not fully belong to German culture because Germans saw him as Jewish. He could not fully belong to Jewish culture because he lacked knowledge and practice. He existed in the gap. This gap appears in his writing. Kafka's protagonists are almost never explicitly Jewish, but they embody Jewish experience. They are outsiders trying to gain entry. They are accused without knowing their crime. They are subject to incomprehensible authority. They navigate hostile systems that were not designed for them. These are Jewish experiences translated into universal terms. The trial can be read as Jewish allegory. Joseph K. is accused by a system he does not understand. He cannot defend himself because he does not know the rules. He is guilty by virtue of who he is, not what he has done. The accusation precedes any action. This mirrors the Jewish experience under anti-Semitism. You are guilty of being Jewish. No defense is possible because the accusation is not about what you did, but what you are. The execution scene has liturgical resonance. Joseph K. is led to his death. He hopes for intervention that does not come. He dies like a dog, aware of his shame. Jewish readers recognized echoes of martyrdom narratives, stories of Jews killed for their identity. Kafka secularizes this tradition, but the structure remains. The castle also resonates with Jewish experience. Kay arrives as a stranger, seeking acceptance. He wants to work, to contribute, to belong, but he is never fully accepted. He remains always an outsider. The village tolerates him, but does not embrace him. This was the Jewish condition in Europe. Present but not fully included, contributing but not fully valued, living among others but not fully belonging. Kafka's interest in Yiddish theater reveals his ambivalence about Jewish identity. In 1911, a Yiddish theater troupe performed in Prague. Kafka attended multiple performances. He was fascinated. These were Eastern European Jews, not assimilated like his father. They maintained traditional culture, spoke Yiddish, performed Jewish stories. Kafka organized an event to introduce Yiddish literature to Prague's German-speaking Jews. He gave an introductory speech. He studied Yiddish. He considered this authentic Judaism, not the empty formalism of his father's generation, but he also recognized he could not simply adopt it. He was too assimilated, too modern, too far removed from that world. Late in life, Kafka studied Hebrew. He read Zionist literature. He considered moving to Palestine. Zionism offered a solution to the Jewish problem: create a Jewish homeland where Jews could be the majority, where Jewish culture would be normal rather than marginal. Many of Kafka's friends became Zionists. Max Brod emigrated to Palestine after Kafka's death. But Kafka never fully committed to Zionism. He was drawn to it intellectually but skeptical practically. He doubted whether a Jewish state would solve the deeper problems of identity and belonging. He recognized that even in a Jewish homeland, he would still be himself, still alienated, still struggling with the same internal conflicts. His relationship with Dora Diamant in his final year brought him closer to Jewish practice. Dora came from a Hasidic family. She knew Hebrew. She observed Jewish law. With her, Kafka attended Jewish cultural events in Berlin. He talked about living in Palestine. He imagined opening a restaurant where Dora would cook and he would wait tables. This fantasy represented a life he never lived, simple, physical, rooted in Jewish community. But he was too sick. The tuberculosis was killing him. The fantasy remained fantasy. He died without resolving his relationship to Jewish identity. He was buried in the Jewish cemetery in Prague according to Jewish custom. But his writing remains stubbornly universal, accessible to readers of all backgrounds or none. The question of Kafka's Jewishness became urgent after his death. The Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933. They began identifying Jewish writers for censorship and eventual destruction. Kafka was Jewish. His work was banned. His 3 sisters, still living in Prague, were murdered in concentration camps during the Holocaust. Max Brod, also Jewish, fled Prague in 1939 as the Nazis invaded. He took Kafka's manuscripts with him to Palestine. Had he not done so, they would have been destroyed. Kafka's work survived the attempt to eliminate Jewish culture from Europe, but most of Kafka's family did not. After the Holocaust, Kafka's work took on new meanings. The trial and the castle were read as prophecies of totalitarian terror. The arbitrary arrest, the incomprehensible bureaucracy, the execution without trial, these seemed to anticipate Nazi procedures. Kafka had somehow foreseen the administrative murder of millions. But Kafka was not predicting the Holocaust. He was describing the experience of living under arbitrary authority, of being subject to systems that do not explain themselves. This experience was particularly Jewish in his time. Jews lived throughout Europe without full rights, subject to regulations that changed unpredictably, vulnerable to violence that erupted periodically. The Holocaust made explicit what had been implicit. The system that Jews had navigated for centuries, the bureaucracy they had learned to manage, suddenly became machinery for extermination. The forms and procedures, the documentation and categorization, the trains and camps, all organized with bureaucratic efficiency. Kafka understood bureaucracy's capacity for dehumanization. Jewish writers after the Holocaust claimed Kafka as one of their own. He became a Jewish writer despite his lack of traditional Jewish content. His themes, alienation, persecution, incomprehensible judgment, were seen as essentially Jewish. His style, ironic, self-questioning, resistant to closure, was identified with Jewish intellectual tradition. This appropriation was not entirely wrong. Kafka's work does emerge from Jewish experience, even when it does not explicitly mention Jewishness. The sense of being observed and judged, of being subject to standards set by others, of being guilty without knowing why. These are experiences shaped by living as a minority in a hostile society. But Kafka's work also transcends Jewish particularity. Readers who know nothing about Jewish history recognize themselves in his characters. The alienation he describes is not only Jewish, but modern. The bureaucracy he depicts is not only anti-Semitic, but universal. His genius was to distill particular Jewish experience into universal human condition. The tension between particular and universal defines Kafka's relationship to Jewish identity. He could not escape being Jewish. It shaped his experience fundamentally. But he also could not accept Jewish identity uncritically. He questioned it, struggled with it, tried to understand what it meant. His work reflects this struggle. It is deeply Jewish in its concerns and sensibilities. But it refuses to declare itself Jewish. It operates in code, in suggestion, in resonance. Jewish readers recognize the Jewish elements. Non-Jewish readers do not need to recognize them to understand the work. This ambiguity is itself characteristic of assimilated Jewish experience. You are Jewish enough to be excluded from majority culture, but you are not Jewish enough to feel secure in Jewish culture. You exist in between, belonging fully to neither world. This in-between space is uncomfortable but also creatively fertile. Kafka never resolved his Jewish identity. He never decided whether to embrace it, reject it, or transcend it. He lived in the question, and his work embodies that unresolved questioning. It asks, what does it mean to be judged for who you are rather than what you do? What does it mean to be subject to laws you did not make and do not understand? What does it mean to seek acceptance in a world that has already decided you do not belong? These are Jewish questions, but they are also human questions. Love, sex, and impossible relationships. Franz Kafka proposed marriage twice, both times to the same woman, Felice Bauer. Both engagements were broken. They never married. The relationship lasted 5 years, from 1912 to 1917, conducted mostly through letters. Kafka wrote her over 500 letters. The relationship tormented him and fascinated him in equal measure. It was central to his life and completely impossible. Kafka met Felice at Max Brod's apartment in August 1912. She was visiting from Berlin. She worked for a company that manufactured dictation machines. She was practical, businesslike, socially confident. Everything Kafka was not. He was immediately drawn to her. A month later, he began writing letters. The letters started formally but quickly became obsessive. Kafka wrote daily, sometimes multiple times per day. He wanted to know everything about Felice, what she ate for breakfast, what time she went to bed, who she spoke with. The letters were demanding. He needed her to respond immediately. He became anxious when replies were delayed. But the content of the letters was contradictory. He declared his love. He said he could not live without her. Then he said marriage was impossible. His writing required complete solitude. A wife would destroy his ability to work. He needed to write at night. He could not share his life with anyone. He loved her desperately and she must stay away. Felice was understandably confused. She wanted a normal relationship. Courtship, engagement, marriage, family. Kafka offered only letters and impossibility. He visited her in Berlin occasionally. These visits were awkward. Face to face, he had difficulty communicating. He preferred the distance of written correspondence. Letters allowed him to control the interaction, to revise and reconsider before sending. In 1914, after 2 years of correspondence, they became engaged. Kafka immediately regretted it. He felt trapped. Marriage meant the end of his writing. Marriage meant becoming like his father, a bourgeois head of household. Marriage meant sex and children and domestic responsibility. He was terrified. The engagement created a crisis. Kafka arranged a meeting in Berlin with Felice, her sister, and a friend. The meeting became a tribunal. They confronted him about his contradictory behavior. He sat silently while they accused him. He described it later as his own trial. The engagement was broken. Kafka felt relief and devastation simultaneously. He had escaped the trap, but he had lost Felice. He spent months in anguish. He wrote The Trial during this period. The novel's themes, incomprehensible accusation, judgment without clear charge, execution despite confusion, emerged from his emotional state. They reconciled in 1915. The letters resumed, the same pattern repeated. Declarations of love and impossibility, need and rejection. By 1917, they were engaged again. Kafka rented an apartment in Prague. They prepared for marriage. Then he coughed up blood, tuberculosis. The engagement broke for the final time. Felice married someone else in 1919. Kafka's relationship with Felice reveals his fundamental conflict about intimacy. He desired connection desperately. His letters expressed genuine longing for companionship, but he also feared connection would destroy him. He needed absolute freedom to write. Any commitment would compromise that freedom. He could not have both love and art. This was not unique to Felice. Kafka had relationships with other women. All followed similar patterns: intense attraction, declarations of need, then withdrawal and impossibility. Julie Vorizek was one such woman. Kafka met her in 1919. His father disapproved violently. Kafka and Julie planned to marry anyway. They obtained a marriage license. But at the last moment, Kafka could not go through with it. Milena Jasenska was different. She was Czech, married, sophisticated. She translated Kafka's work into Czech. They met in 1920. The relationship was passionate and brief. Kafka wanted her to leave her husband. She could not or would not. They exchanged intense letters. But the relationship existed mostly in writing, not in shared life. It ended after 2 years. Kafka's final relationship was with Dora Diamant. He met her in 1923, the last year of his life. She was 19, he was 40. She came from a Hasidic family in Poland. She was cultured despite her young age, spoke multiple languages, had broken with her traditional family. They lived together in Berlin. This was the closest Kafka came to domestic partnership. They rented an apartment. They shopped for groceries together. They cooked meals. Kafka experienced ordinary coupledom for the first time. He later described this as the happiest period of his life. But he was dying. The tuberculosis was advanced. He could barely eat. He was in constant pain. Dora cared for him tenderly. She read to him. She helped him communicate when speech became impossible. She witnessed his deterioration and death. The relationship ended not because Kafka fled, but because his body gave out. Kafka's difficulties with relationships were partly temperamental. He was intensely introverted. Social interaction exhausted him. He needed solitude to write. A partner would intrude on that solitude. But the difficulties went deeper than temperament. Kafka seemed to experience desire itself as threatening. In his diaries, he described sexual feelings with anxiety and shame. He visited brothels but found the experiences degrading. He masturbated and felt guilty. His sexual desires disturbed him. This anxiety had roots in his upbringing. His father was aggressively masculine, physical, confident, sexually comfortable. Kafka felt he could never measure up to this model. His own sexuality felt weak, shameful, inadequate. His fiction reflects this anxiety. Sexual encounters in Kafka's work are almost always disturbing. In The Castle, Kay has sex with Frida on the floor of a bar, rolling in puddles of beer. The scene is unpleasant and transactional. In The Trial, Joseph Kay encounters women who are sexually available, but also connected to the corrupt court. Sex is entangled with power and degradation. Marriage in Kafka's work is portrayed negatively. Married characters are trapped in unhappy domestic situations. Marriage represents the end of possibility, the death of the self. To marry is to become one's father, to accept bourgeois life, to abandon art and authentic existence. Kafka could not imagine marriage as fulfillment. He saw it only as prison. Yet he desperately wanted what marriage represented: connection, intimacy, belonging. His letters to Felice express real longing. He wanted someone to share his life with. He wanted not to be alone. He imagined domestic scenes, reading together in the evening, talking about the day, existing in comfortable companionship. But he could not believe he deserved this. His self-hatred was too deep. He felt he was damaged, wrong, unworthy of love. Any woman who loved him was making a mistake. She did not really know him. If she truly understood him, she would leave. Better to push her away first than wait for inevitable rejection. This pattern appears in The Judgment. Georg Bendemann is engaged to Frida Brandenfeld. He writes to a friend announcing his engagement. His father erupts in rage, accusing Georg of betrayal. The father sentences Georg to death by drowning. Georg accepts the sentence and throws himself off a bridge. The story dramatizes Kafka's internal conflict. The engagement represents normal life, social acceptance, joining the world of adults. But this betrays something, perhaps authenticity, perhaps the writing self, perhaps loyalty to suffering. The father figure pronounces the engagement illegitimate. Georg must choose between the engagement and the father's approval. He chooses death. Kafka understood that his relationship difficulties were connected to his writing. He needed writing more than he needed human connection. Writing was his real relationship, his true intimacy. Words on the page were more real to him than people. This was isolating, but also necessary. If he gave up writing for marriage, he would lose himself. In letters to Felice, he explained this explicitly. He could not be a husband and a writer. The roles were incompatible. A husband must be present, available, focused on family. A writer must be absent, withdrawn, focused on inner life. Kafka could not do both. He had to choose. He chose writing, but this choice cost him. He lived alone. He had no children. He died without a life partner. His last weeks were spent with Dora, but they had been together less than a year. Most of his life was solitary. He had friends, but not family. He had love, but not lasting partnership. He sacrificed ordinary human connection for art. The question is whether this sacrifice was necessary. Could Kafka have been both writer and husband? Many writers manage. But Kafka subscribed to a romantic myth about artists. They must suffer to create. Happiness kills art. He believed his writing depended on his misery, so he protected his misery, even at great personal cost. Modern relationships also appear in Kafka's work. His characters do not have traditional marriages. They have transactions, encounters, temporary arrangements. Kay seduces Frida partly to gain access to Clam. The traditional family structure is absent or corrupt. This reflects Kafka's sense that modern life has made traditional relationships impossible. Kafka lived this modern isolation. He existed in rented rooms, ate in restaurants, worked in an office, spent evenings alone. His relationships with women were conducted through letters across distances. He experienced connection as something always mediated, never direct, never fully satisfying. His writing was his attempt to bridge this gap. He wrote to connect with readers he would never meet. He poured his inner life onto pages that might outlast him. The writing was intimate communication with absent others. It was the relationship he could sustain. In this sense, Kafka's impossible relationships with women were extensions of his impossible relationship with the world. He wanted to connect but could not. He reached out but withdrew. He longed for intimacy but required distance. He loved but could not sustain love. The pattern repeated at every level. The tragedy is not that Kafka remained unmarried. The tragedy is that Kafka wanted connection and denied himself connection. He suffered from isolation while creating the conditions of isolation. He was his own obstacle, his own prison, his own impossibility. His art emerged from this suffering, but the art did not resolve the suffering. In the end, with Dora, he found some peace. Too late, too brief, but real. For a few months, Franz Kafka was not entirely alone. The artist's struggle, writing as salvation. Franz Kafka wrote late at night after working all day at the Insurance Institute. He would come home, eat dinner with his family, rest briefly, then begin writing around 11 or midnight. He worked through the night, sometimes until dawn. Then he slept a few hours before returning to the office. This schedule destroyed his health, but it was the only way he could write. Writing was not optional for Kafka. It was necessity. In his diaries, he describes the compulsion to write as something beyond choice. When he was not writing, he felt empty, dead, pointless. Only writing made him feel alive. Only writing gave his existence meaning. Everything else was waiting, marking time, enduring until he could write again. But writing was also torment. It required complete concentration. Any interruption broke the spell. He needed absolute silence, total solitude, no obligations or distractions. These conditions were nearly impossible to arrange. He lived with his parents. The apartment walls were thin. Sounds from the street penetrated his room. His mind was full of anxieties from work, family, relationships. Writing required pushing all this aside and entering a state of pure focus. When the focus came, it was ecstatic. Kafka describes nights when the writing poured out of him. He could not write fast enough to capture what he was seeing. The stories emerged complete, as if dictated by some external source. He was not composing, but transcribing. His hand struggled to keep up with the vision. The Judgment was written in a single night in September 1912. Kafka started around 10 in the evening and finished at 6 in the morning. He wrote continuously, without pause. When he was done, he felt he had achieved something perfect. The story had emerged whole and complete. This was writing as he dreamed it could be. Effortless revelation, pure expression, unmediated truth. But such nights were rare. More often, writing was struggle. He would sit at his desk for hours, producing nothing. Words came slowly or not at all. What he did write seemed inadequate, false, wrong. He crossed out sentences. He abandoned drafts. He filled notebooks with beginnings that led nowhere. The inspiration would not come or came briefly, then vanished. Kafka's perfectionism made writing agonizing. Nothing he wrote satisfied him. He read his work and found it lacking. It did not express what he had intended. It did not capture the vision he had seen. It was merely words on paper, dead and lifeless. The gap between intention and execution tormented him. This is why he left his novels unfinished. The Trial, The Castle, and America all break off without conclusion. Kafka could not find the right endings, or he lost faith in the projects, or the initial inspiration faded and he could not continue without it. He moved on to new work, leaving the old work incomplete. He also destroyed much of what he wrote. His diaries record burning manuscripts. He threw away stories. He asked Max Brod repeatedly to destroy everything unpublished after his death. This was not false modesty. Kafka genuinely believed his work was not good enough to preserve. It had failed to achieve what he demanded of it. What he demanded was perfection, absolute truth, complete expression of inner reality. Anything less was failure. But this standard made success impossible. No writing could meet it. So Kafka lived in perpetual dissatisfaction with his work, always falling short of his own impossible standards. Yet he continued writing. Despite the difficulty, despite the dissatisfaction, despite the exhaustion, he wrote. Because not writing was worse. Not writing meant death of the spirit. Not writing meant his life had no purpose. He had to write even if the writing was inadequate. The attempt was everything. His day job made writing possible materially but difficult practically. The Insurance Institute provided income and security. Without it, he could not afford to live independently or buy time to write. But the job consumed his best hours. He arrived at the office tired from writing all night. He spent his mornings performing bureaucratic tasks while his mind remained in the fictional world he had left hours earlier. Kafka resented the job but never quit. He fantasized constantly about resignation. He imagined living simply, writing full-time, needing nothing but a small room and bread, but he never did it. He was too afraid. What if he quit and could not write? What if removing the obstacle of the job removed the tension that made writing possible? This division appears in his fiction. His protagonists often have jobs that alienate them. Gregor Samsa is a traveling salesman. Joseph K. is a bank officer. K. claims to be a land surveyor. These jobs define their social identities but mean nothing to them personally. The characters go through the motions while their inner lives exist elsewhere. Kafka understood that modern employment colonizes the self. You sell your time, your energy, your attention. You perform tasks that do not interest you for purposes you do not value. You become a function within a system. Your authentic self must be hidden, saved for private moments that grow increasingly rare. But work also provides a structure. Without it, time becomes formless. Kafka needed the constraint. He needed to steal time for writing. Writing in the limited hours after work made those hours precious. If he had unlimited time, perhaps the urgency would vanish. This is the paradox of the artist with a day job. The job prevents full dedication to art, but it also protects art from market demands. Kafka never had to write to earn money. He never had to compromise his vision for publication. He could write exactly what he needed to write without considering audience or sales. The job bought him creative freedom even as it limited creative time. Few people knew Kafka was a writer during his lifetime. His colleagues at the Insurance Institute knew nothing of his literary work. His family knew he wrote but did not take it seriously. He published in small literary magazines with tiny circulations. His books appeared in limited editions. He had a reputation in small literary circles but no broader recognition. This obscurity pained him. He wanted recognition but could not pursue it aggressively. He was too uncertain of his work's value. He could not promote himself. He relied on Max Brod to manage publication. Brod believed in Kafka's genius and worked to get his writing into print. Without Brod, Kafka would have published even less. The question of audience troubled Kafka. Who was he writing for? He could not imagine a general public appreciating his work. It was too strange, too internal, too specific to his psychological reality. But he also could not write only for himself. Writing required the possibility of being read, of being understood, of connecting with another consciousness. His letters served this function. He wrote constantly to friends, family, lovers. The letters were a form of writing, a way of thinking through words, of establishing connection across distance. They were easier than fiction because they had a specific audience. He knew who would read them and could shape his words accordingly. But letters were not enough. He needed to create fiction. Stories and novels allowed him to explore experiences he could not directly communicate. He could show rather than tell. He could create worlds that embodied his inner reality. He could make others feel what he felt without having to explain it. When The Metamorphosis was published in 1915, Kafka gave specific instructions about the cover. The insect must not be shown. The illustrator could depict Gregor's room, his family's reaction, anything except the transformed body itself. Kafka understood that the power of the story came from each reader imagining the insect differently. To show it would limit the imagination, would make specific what should remain suggestive. This reveals Kafka's understanding of literary art. Writing is not photography. It does not reproduce reality exactly. It creates impressions, suggestions, possibilities. The reader completes the work through imagination. The writer provides the structure, but the reader generates the experience. Kafka was influenced by Flaubert's commitment to craft. He admired Flaubert's precision, his dedication to finding the exact right word. He studied Flaubert's sentences. He tried to achieve similar clarity and intensity. Every word must be necessary. Every sentence must advance the whole. Nothing extraneous could remain. This demanded endless revision. Kafka rewrote constantly. He tested different phrasings. He cut ruthlessly. The spare, direct prose of his mature work was achieved through intense labor. It looked simple but required enormous effort to produce. He was also influenced by Yiddish theater and Eastern European Jewish storytelling. These traditions valued narrative directness. They presented events without elaborate explanation. They trusted the audience to understand implications. Kafka absorbed this aesthetic. His stories often feel like parables or folk tales, simple on the surface but containing depths. But Kafka transformed these influences into something entirely his own. His voice is unmistakable. The flat tone, the matter-of-fact presentation of impossible situations, the protagonist's acceptance of absurdity, the bureaucratic precision applied to nightmare, this combination is unique to Kafka. No one else sounds like him. Other writers tried to imitate Kafka after his work became famous. The imitations always failed. They could reproduce the surface, the bureaucracy, the transformation, the inexplicable accusation, but they could not reproduce the tone. Kafka's tone emerged from his psychological reality. It cannot be faked or copied. It is the sound of his specific consciousness encountering the world. That consciousness was marked by shame. Kafka felt shame about his body, his sexuality, his family, his Jewishness, his inability to marry, his work at the Insurance Institute, his writing. Shame permeates his fiction. His characters are ashamed of their accusations, their transformations, their failures. They feel they deserve their fates, even when the fates are unjust. This shame was culturally conditioned. Jewish consciousness in Christian Europe carried historical shame. Male consciousness in patriarchal society carried shame about weakness. Modern consciousness, in an age of faith's collapse, carried shame about meaninglessness. Kafka internalized all these forms of shame and made them visible in his work. But shame was also his material. He wrote from shame, about shame, through shame. He did not transcend it, he explored it. He showed how shame operates, how it justifies unjust treatment, how it prevents resistance, how it colonizes the self. His characters accept their guilt because shame tells them they must be guilty. Writing was Kafka's way of examining his shame without being destroyed by it. He could put shame into characters, observe it from outside, understand its mechanisms. The writing created distance between himself and his experience. It transformed suffering into art, shame into literature, agony into meaning. This transformation was not healing. Kafka did not write to cure himself. Writing did not make him happier or healthier or more functional. If anything, it intensified his isolation and exhausted his body, but it made his suffering meaningful. It gave his pain purpose. It justified his existence. He wrote in a diary entry that writing was his only reason for living. If he could not write, he might as well die. This was not metaphor. He meant it literally. Writing was the center around which his life organized itself. Everything else, the job, the relationships, the family obligations, was secondary. Writing came first. This single-minded dedication produced great art but a difficult life. Kafka sacrificed ordinary happiness for writing. He gave up marriage, family, comfort, health. He accepted isolation and suffering. He made himself into an instrument for producing literature. The cost was enormous. Modern culture romanticizes this sacrifice. We admire artists who suffer for their art. We believe great work requires great pain. Kafka has become an icon of this mythology. The suffering writer who died young, leaving behind masterpieces published against his wishes by a faithful friend. But Kafka himself did not romanticize suffering. He would have preferred to be healthy, happy, married, and still able to write. The suffering was not chosen. It was endured. He made art from it because that was the only way he knew to give it meaning. His instruction to burn his manuscripts was sincere. He believed his work had failed to achieve what he intended. It did not deserve preservation. Max Broad's disobedience was betrayal of Kafka's explicit wishes. But it was also recognition that Kafka was wrong about his work's value. The world needed these books. Without Broad's betrayal, we would not have The Trial, The Castle, most of the stories, the letters, the diaries. Kafka would be a footnote in literary history. Instead, he is central to 20th century literature. His influence is incalculable. His name has become an adjective. His vision has shaped how we understand modern life. This would have astonished Kafka. He could not imagine his work mattering to anyone. He wrote in obscurity, for obscure publications, reaching tiny audiences. He died thinking he had failed. He did not know his writing would survive, would be translated into every language, would be read by millions. The irony is profound. Kafka wrote about failure, obscurity, powerlessness. His work depicts characters who cannot achieve their goals, cannot make themselves understood, cannot escape their fates. And this work achieved immortality. The writer who felt he had accomplished nothing accomplished everything. But this success came too late for Kafka. He never experienced recognition. He never knew his work mattered. The success belongs to his afterlife, not his life. Animals and Allegory beyond human. Gregor Samsa wakes up as an insect. A hunger artist fasts in a cage while spectators watch. A burrowing creature digs elaborate tunnels in the earth. An ape delivers a report to an academy about becoming human. A mouse investigates the nature of singing. Kafka's fiction is populated by animals, or humans who become animals, or animals who speak like humans. These animal stories operate differently from traditional fables. In Aesop or La Fontaine, animals represent human types. The fox is cunning, the lion is noble, the ant is industrious. The moral is clear, the allegory is transparent. Kafka's animals resist such simple interpretation. When Gregor becomes an insect, what does the insect represent? Disability, mental illness, social exclusion, the body's rebellion against the mind. All of these and none completely. The insect is literal and symbolic simultaneously. It is actually an insect and also means something beyond insect, but what it means remains open. A report to an academy presents an ape named Red Peter who has learned to behave like a human. He addresses an academy of scientists, explaining how he transformed himself. He was captured in Africa, caged on a ship, and faced a choice: remain an ape and die in captivity, or find a way out. The way out was to become human. Red Peter learned to spit, to drink schnapps, to speak. He performed humanness until it became second nature. He gave up being an ape to survive. Now he lives as a vaudeville performer, neither ape nor fully human, but something in between. He reports to the academy not about ape nature, but about the process of self-transformation under duress. The story can be read as Jewish assimilation. Jews in Europe faced a similar choice: remain culturally distinct and face persecution, or assimilate into European society and lose identity. Red Peter is the assimilated Jew who has learned to perform Europeanness but remains fundamentally other. The academy studies him as specimen, not peer. But the story also addresses any forced assimilation. Colonized people learning colonizers' languages, workers adopting bourgeois manners, anyone who must transform themselves to survive in hostile environments. Red Peter's report is testimony to the cost of survival. He is alive but has lost something essential. He cannot return to ape nature but has not truly become human. The metamorphosis works differently. Gregor does not choose transformation. It happens to him. He wakes up changed. His consciousness remains human, but his body is insect. The gap between mind and body becomes absolute. He thinks like Gregor, but exists as vermin. The insect body makes visible what was hidden. Gregor was already alienated from his family, from his work, from himself. He was already living an insect-like existence, working mechanically, living in isolation, serving others without receiving care. The transformation externalizes internal reality. But the insect is also just an insect. Kafka describes the body carefully. The many legs, the hard shell, the difficulty moving. Gregor experiences his new body physically. He learns its capabilities and limitations. He discovers he can climb walls but finds human food disgusting. The insect exists literally, not only symbolically. This double nature is essential to Kafka's method. The impossible element is presented as fact. Then the story explores the logical consequences. What would actually happen if a man became an insect? How would his family react? How would he eat? Where would he sleep? The fantastic premise is treated with absolute realism. The burrow is told from the perspective of a creature digging an elaborate underground home. The creature is never named or described. It might be a badger, a mole, some invented animal. It obsesses over the burrow's security, constantly improving defenses, worrying about intruders, listening for sounds that might indicate danger. The story is pure anxiety. The creature can never feel safe. Every security measure reveals new vulnerabilities. The more elaborate the defenses, the more points of potential failure. The creature is trapped in its own protective mechanisms. The burrow that should provide safety becomes a source of constant worry. This reads as psychological allegory. The burrow is the self. The defenses are psychological protections. The creature is consciousness defending itself against threats real and imagined. But the animal perspective makes the allegory strange. We experience the world through non-human perception. This defamiliarizes human psychology. Josephine the singer presents a mouse community and their relationship to a singer mouse named Josephine. Josephine's singing might be just ordinary squeaking. The other mice cannot tell if she has special talent or if they simply want to believe she does. They gather to hear her perform. Her singing provides comfort even if it is nothing special. The story explores art's function in community. Does art require objective greatness, or is it enough that people find meaning in it? Josephine thinks she is special. The community treats her as special, but the narrator suggests her singing is nothing unusual. What matters is the collective experience, not the individual talent. Using mice allows Kafka to examine these questions from outside human assumptions. The mouse community operates differently from human society. They have different needs, different values. Art functions differently for mice than for humans. The animal perspective provides critical distance. This is a central function of Kafka's animals. They allow him to examine human situations from outside human perspective. When Red Peter speaks, he analyzes human behavior as an outsider who has learned to imitate it. His observations are both accurate and strange. He sees what humans cannot see about themselves. Kafka was influenced by animal fables and fairy tales. These genres allowed impossible elements to appear naturally. A frog becomes a prince, a cat wears boots and speaks. Animals in these stories operate according to fairy tale logic, not realistic logic. Kafka borrowed this permission to depart from realism while applying realistic psychology. But his animals also reflect scientific interest. Darwin had shown human connection to animals. Freud had explored the animal nature within humans. The 19th century had discovered that humans were animals, not separate creations. This knowledge unsettled human self-understanding. Kafka's transformations literalized this anxiety. If humans are animals, what separates us? Consciousness, language, culture, but these can be learned, as Red Peter demonstrates, or they can be lost, as Gregor discovers. The boundary between human and animal is unstable, permeable, subject to collapse. A hunger artist presents a man who fasts professionally. He sits in a cage while crowds watch him not eat. For a time, this is popular entertainment, then interest fades. The hunger artist continues fasting in obscurity. Finally, he admits he fasted not from discipline, but because he never found food he liked. He dies and is replaced by a panther. The panther is alive in a way the hunger artist never was. It moves powerfully, it eats with gusto. Crowds gather to watch it. The contrast is absolute. The hunger artist denied his animal nature and withered. The panther embraces its animal nature and thrives. This suggests that denying the body, denying physical needs, denying animal nature leads to death. The hunger artist practiced extreme asceticism. He tried to transcend the body through refusing to feed it. But this did not elevate him. It killed him, and the world moved on to admire the healthy animal. Kafka's own relationship to his body resembled the hunger artist's. He ate little, he was thin, he practiced various dietary restrictions. He saw eating as a necessary evil rather than a pleasure. He wanted to transcend physical needs and focus purely on writing. But his body rebelled. It developed tuberculosis. It wasted away. Like the hunger artist, he died from neglecting physical reality. The animal stories ask what it means to be human. Traditional answers, reason, language, morality, soul, are tested and found inadequate. Red Peter has reason and language but remains other. Gregor retains consciousness but loses humanity. The hunger artist transcends animal needs but achieves nothing. The panther embodies animal vitality and is more alive than the ascetic human. Perhaps humanity is not elevation above animal nature, but particular kind of animal existence. Humans are animals who are aware of being animals. This awareness creates distance from immediate experience. We observe ourselves, we judge ourselves, we try to be something other than what we are, and this creates suffering. Animals in Kafka's stories often seem more content than humans. They do not question themselves, they do not struggle with meaning, they exist in their being without alienation. The burrowing creature worries, but it worries concretely about real threats. It does not suffer existential anxiety. This is not romantic primitivism. Kafka is not suggesting we should abandon civilization and return to nature. His animals are not idealized. They suffer, they fear, they fail. But they suffer without the additional layer of self-consciousness that characterizes human suffering. They do not judge their suffering as shameful or meaningless. They simply experience it. Human characters in Kafka's work often envy this simplicity. They want to escape self-consciousness. They want to exist without constant self-judgment. But they cannot. Once you are aware, you cannot become unaware. Once you question, you cannot stop questioning. Human consciousness is both gift and curse. The animal stories also explore communication across difference. When Red Peter speaks to the Academy, he translates between species. But something is lost in translation. He cannot fully explain ape experience to humans. They cannot fully understand because they have never been apes. Communication reaches limits. Similarly, Gregor cannot make his family understand. He comprehends their words but cannot respond in language they recognize. The communication is one-directional. He receives but cannot transmit. The insect body blocks expression. He is locked inside himself, unable to bridge the gap. This reflects Kafka's experience of writing. He tried to communicate internal experience to readers, but words are inadequate. The experience cannot be fully translated into language. Something essential always escapes. The reader receives something but not everything. The writer remains partially incomprehensible. Animals in Kafka's fiction are both strange and familiar. We recognize ourselves in them. The ape learning to perform humanity, the insect trapped in his room, the creature obsessing over security, the performer desperate for recognition, these are human experiences. But the animal form makes them strange. We see ourselves from outside. The familiar becomes uncanny. This is Kafka's consistent method. Take ordinary experience and present it from an angle that reveals its strangeness. Show work as the trial. Show family as transformation into vermin. Show social climbing as ape learning to drink schnapps. The animal form is defamiliarization technique. It makes visible what habit has made invisible. The animals also introduce biological reality into stories that might otherwise be purely psychological or social. Bodies matter. Physical needs matter. The material reality of existence cannot be transcended through thought alone. The hunger artist tries and fails. Gregor tries to maintain his humanity through consciousness, but his insect body determines his fate. Kafka understood that we are embodied minds. Our physical form shapes our experience. Gregor cannot participate in family life not only because they reject him, but because his body cannot perform human actions. He cannot speak, cannot eat human food, cannot fit through the door. The body is not prison for the soul. The body is condition of existence. Modern philosophy, since Descartes, had treated mind and body as separate. Mind was privileged. Body was merely mechanical housing. Kafka's animals reject this dualism. Gregor is both mind and body. They cannot be separated. When the body changes, the entire being changes. Identity is not purely mental, it is embodied. The animal stories also suggest that categories are unstable. Gregor is human and insect. Red Peter is ape and human. The hunger artist is human but barely alive. The panther is purely animal but embodies vitality humans lack. The boundaries blur. Being is fluid, subject to transformation, resistant to fixed classification. This instability reflects Kafka's historical moment. Old certainties were collapsing. Darwin had shown humans were animals. Freud had shown consciousness was not unified. Einstein had shown space and time were relative. The solid categories of the 19th century were dissolving. Kafka's transformations literalize this conceptual instability. His animals are modernist technique. They embody the breakdown of traditional categories, the collapse of human exceptionalism, the recognition that identity is performed rather than essential. They make philosophical insights into narrative situations. Abstract ideas become concrete experiences through animal bodies. But the animals are also simply themselves. Kafka describes them with attention and care. The insect's legs, the ape's movements, the burrowing creature's anxiety. They exist in the stories as beings, not only symbols. This is what makes Kafka's allegories powerful. They mean something beyond themselves but also resist reduction to meaning. They remain irreducibly strange. Prophecy of the 20th century, Kafka and Totalitarianism. Franz Kafka died in 1924. He never witnessed the rise of Nazism or Stalinism. He never saw concentration camps or show trials. He never experienced totalitarian government. Yet his work seems to predict these horrors with uncanny precision. Readers after World War II read The Trial and the Castle as prophecies of totalitarian terror. The connection is undeniable. Joseph K. is arrested without charge, subjected to a legal process he cannot understand, and executed without trial. This mirrors procedures under totalitarian regimes. Stalin's victims confessed to crimes they did not commit. Nazi victims were processed through bureaucratic systems before extermination. Kafka seemed to foresee the administrative machinery of mass murder. But Kafka was not predicting the future. He was observing the present. The structures that would enable totalitarianism already existed in his time. Bureaucracy, surveillance, arbitrary authority, the reduction of individuals to files and numbers, these were features of modern states before Hitler or Stalin came to power. Kafka worked in a bureaucracy. He saw how it functioned. He understood that bureaucratic systems could operate with ruthless efficiency while serving inhuman purposes. The insurance institute where he worked was benign in intention. It was meant to help injured workers, but the bureaucratic machinery was indifferent to human suffering. It processed claims according to rules, not compassion. This same machinery could be turned to other purposes. The trains that transported workers could transport prisoners. The forms that documented injuries could document racial categories. The officials who assessed disability could select people for extermination. The structure was neutral. It could serve any master. Max Weber identified this danger. Bureaucracy, he argued, was becoming the dominant form of organization. It was efficient, rational, predictable, but it was also impersonal and amoral. Bureaucracies do not make value judgments. They execute procedures. Feed any goal into a bureaucracy, and it will pursue that goal systematically, regardless of moral considerations. Kafka intuited this. His court in the trial is not evil, it is indifferent. It processes Joseph K. because that is what it does. It processes people. The officials are not sadists. They are functionaries doing their jobs. The system grinds forward regardless of individual will or conscience. This is how the Holocaust functioned. Thousands of ordinary people participated in genocide. They were not all ideological fanatics. Many were bureaucrats following orders, filling out forms, maintaining records, organizing logistics. They were cogs in a machine. The machine was designed to kill millions. But each individual cog was just doing its assigned task. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil. Evil is not always demonic. Sometimes it is banal, ordinary, bureaucratic. People participate in atrocities not because they are monsters, but because they are following procedures, obeying authority, doing their jobs. This is the evil Kafka depicted before it reached its fullest expression. The castle similarly anticipates totalitarian structures. K tries to reach the authority that governs the village, but the authority is inaccessible. It operates through intermediaries. It communicates in ambiguous messages. It maintains power through opacity. No one can challenge the castle because no one can access it. This resembles totalitarian government. Power is centralized but hidden. The leader is everywhere in propaganda but nowhere in person. Decisions are made in secret. The system claims to serve the people but ignores their needs. Attempting to understand or challenge the system is futile. The structure protects itself through its own complexity. Kafka also predicted the use of confession and self-incrimination. In the trial, Joseph K. is expected to confess. The court waits for him to admit his guilt. Even though he does not know what he is accused of, he is supposed to recognize and acknowledge his crime. This is absurd, but it became reality in Stalin's show trials. Accused party members confessed to elaborate conspiracies they could not possibly have committed. They denounced themselves in public. They accepted their guilt and praised their executioners. The confessions were scripted performances, but they served the system's needs. They demonstrated the state's power to make people betray themselves. Kafka understood that power operates most effectively when it is internalized. You do not need guards if people police themselves. You do not need torture if people feel guilty without being accused. The most efficient oppression is self-oppression. Make people believe they deserve punishment and they will punish themselves. His characters embody this internalized oppression. Joseph K. accepts his arrest. He tries to defend himself within the system rather than rejecting the system's legitimacy. Gregor Samsa accepts his family's rejection. He feels he deserves to be treated as vermin. K accepts that he must earn the castle's approval rather than questioning why approval is necessary. This anticipates totalitarian psychology. Victims often blame themselves. They believe they must have done something wrong. They accepted the state's judgment. They confessed to crimes. They went to their deaths believing they deserved it. The system's power came not from force alone, but from convincing people of their own guilt. Kafka's three sisters died in Nazi concentration camps. Eli, Vali, and Otla were murdered because they were Jewish. They were caught in the bureaucratic machinery Kafka had described. They were categorized, documented, transported, and exterminated according to procedures. They became numbers in files. Their individual humanity was erased by administrative process. Max Brod fled Prague in 1939 with Kafka's manuscripts. Had he not escaped, the manuscripts would have been destroyed. Kafka's work was banned in Nazi Germany as degenerate art by a Jewish author. The Nazis understood that Kafka's writing was dangerous. It revealed too much about how power operates, how bureaucracy dehumanizes, how systems can serve inhuman ends. After the war, Kafka's work took on new significance. Survivors of camps and gulags recognized their experiences in his fiction. The arbitrary arrest, the incomprehensible charges, the faceless authority, the bureaucratic processing, these were not fantasies, they were real. Kafka had described the reality before it fully emerged. But Kafka was not clairvoyant. He was observant. He saw the seeds of totalitarianism in the world around him, the worship of efficiency over humanity, the reduction of people to data, the expansion of bureaucratic control, the acceptance of authority without justification. These trends existed before they reached their logical extremes. Totalitarianism was not an aberration. It was modernity taken to its conclusion. The same forces that created industrial society, bureaucratic administration, and technological progress also created the possibility of totalitarian control. Kafka saw this connection. He understood that rationalization could produce irrationality, that order could produce chaos, that civilization could produce barbarism. His work also predicted surveillance. In the trial, Joseph K. is watched constantly. The court has informers everywhere. His neighbors report on him. His colleagues are suspected of being court officials. He cannot trust anyone. He cannot tell who is watching or what they know. This paranoia becomes reality. Totalitarian states relied on surveillance. Citizens informed on each other. Secret police watched everyone. Trust became impossible. People censored themselves because they never knew who might be listening. Society atomized into isolated individuals, each afraid of everyone else. Kafka depicted this atmosphere of pervasive surveillance before the technology existed to implement it fully. Modern surveillance has exceeded anything Kafka imagined. Governments and corporations track our movements, communications, purchases, relationships. Algorithms predict our behavior. We are monitored constantly. The watchers are invisible. We do not know what they know about us. We modify our behavior because we might be watched. This is Kafka's nightmare made real. His work also anticipated doublethink and contradictory directives. In The Castle, K receives messages that contradict each other. He is told he is employed and not employed. He is welcomed and rejected. He is given instructions that are immediately contradicted. This produces paralysis. He cannot act because any action might be wrong. Totalitarian regimes function through contradiction. Citizens were told to obey rules that changed without notice. They were punished for following orders. They were accused of crimes that were not crimes yesterday. The system maintained power through keeping everyone off balance. No one knew what was expected. Everyone was vulnerable. Kafka showed how this works psychologically. When rules are contradictory, you cannot win. You are always guilty of something. You cannot defend yourself because defense is impossible. You accept your guilt because fighting is futile. The system does not need to be coherent, it just needs to be powerful. But Kafka's relevance extends beyond historical totalitarianism. His work addresses contemporary forms of power. Corporate bureaucracies operate like the castle. Algorithmic systems judge us like the court. We are subject to decisions made by processes we do not understand. We are categorized by systems we cannot access. We are guilty until proven innocent, if proof is even possible. The modern security state uses Kafkaesque procedures. People are detained without charge. They are placed on secret lists. They cannot find out why or challenge the designation. They must prove they are not threats. But how do you prove a negative? How do you defend yourself against an accusation you do not know? Technology companies use the same methods. Your account is suspended. You do not know why. You cannot reach anyone to explain. You submit appeals. Nothing happens. The system has decided there is no process to challenge it. You are powerless against the algorithm. Kafka predicted this. He saw that modern power would operate through opacity and complexity. The powerful would hide behind systems. They would avoid direct confrontation. They would maintain control through making themselves inaccessible. And individuals would be powerless because they could not access or understand the forces controlling their lives. His work remains prophetic because the structures he described have only intensified. Bureaucracy has expanded. Surveillance has increased. Authority has become more remote. Power has become more opaque. We live in Kafka's world more fully than he did. We are all Joseph K. now, accused of crimes we do not understand, subject to judgments we cannot appeal, processed by systems we cannot comprehend. The prophecy was not about specific regimes. It was about the logic of modern power. Kafka revealed how that logic operates. He showed what happens when efficiency replaces humanity, when process replaces justice, when systems replace people. He warned us. We did not listen, and now we live in the world he described. The Kafka effect, his influence on literature and culture. Franz Kafka published little during his lifetime and died in obscurity. Yet within decades of his death, his influence had spread across world literature. Writers on every continent absorbed his vision and techniques. His name became an adjective. To call something Kafkaesque is to recognize a particular quality of modern experience that Kafka first made visible. The influence began with the publication of his major novels. Max Brod released The Trial in 1925, a year after Kafka's death. The Castle followed in 1926. America appeared in 1927. These works arrived at a moment when European literature was searching for new forms to express the disorientation of the post-war world. Kafka provided those forms. The Surrealists claimed Kafka as one of their own. André Breton saw Kafka's dream logic and impossible transformations as aligned with Surrealist principles. The Metamorphosis of Gregor Samsa, the illogical architecture of the court, the geography that refuses to lead where it should, these elements seem to emerge from the unconscious mind. Kafka had accessed the surreal without declaring allegiance to any movement. But Kafka was not a surrealist. His impossible events are presented with documentary precision. He does not celebrate irrationality, he examines it. His tone is not playful or liberating, it is clinical and claustrophobic. The surrealists misread him, but their enthusiasm helped spread his reputation. Existentialist writers found Kafka more compatible. Camus devoted a chapter to Kafka in The Myth of Sisyphus. He recognized Kafka as a fellow explorer of the absurd. Sartre discussed Kafka's depiction of freedom and bad faith. Existentialists saw in Kafka's work the modern condition, existence without essence, freedom without foundation, responsibility without justification. But Kafka preceded existentialism. His work emerged from different concerns. He was not primarily interested in freedom or choice. He was interested in powerlessness and constraint. His characters do not face the burden of radical freedom. They face the impossibility of meaningful action within systems designed to frustrate agency. German literature after World War II was deeply influenced by Kafka. Writers like Heinrich Böll and Günter Grass absorbed his bureaucratic nightmares and his flat documentary tone. They applied these techniques to depicting post-war Germany. The ruins, the displaced persons, the denazification tribunals, the divided country all seemed Kafkaesque. Germany had become Kafka's landscape. In Latin America, Kafka's influence was transformative. Jorge Luis Borges recognized Kafka as a kindred spirit. Both created labyrinths. Both explored the relationship between individual and incomprehensible system. Both used fantastic premises to examine philosophical questions. Borges praised Kafka's ability to make the extraordinary seem inevitable. Gabriel Garcia Marquez read Kafka as a young writer and found liberation. Kafka showed that literature did not need to obey the rules of realism. You could begin with an impossible premise and treat it as fact. This permission enabled magical realism. Marquez's transformations, his matter-of-fact presentation of the impossible, his bureaucratic absurdities, all show Kafka's influence. Japanese literature embraced Kafka enthusiastically. Kobo Abe's novels feature protagonists trapped in inexplicable situations, subject to arbitrary systems, unable to access authority or explanation. The influence is direct. Abe acknowledged Kafka as a model. Haruki Murakami's work similarly shows Kafka's influence in its dreamlike logic and ordinary people encountering impossible situations. In Eastern Europe under communism, Kafka was both banned and essential. His work was too accurate in depicting bureaucratic oppression. Governments recognized the danger, but writers smuggled Kafka into their work anyway. Milan Kundera, living under Czech communism, absorbed Kafka's vision. His novels depict individuals crushed by historical forces beyond their control, subject to systems that erase individuality. Václav Havel, playwright and later president of Czech Republic, acknowledged Kafka's influence. Havel's absurdist plays show bureaucratic systems that have lost connection to purpose. Officials follow procedures that serve no function. Language becomes meaningless. Authority is empty. This is Kafka's legacy in the country of his birth. American literature absorbed Kafka differently. Philip Roth engaged with Kafka directly in his fiction. He wrote a novel imagining Kafka surviving and emigrating to America. Roth saw Kafka as exploring Jewish identity, father-son conflict, the artist's struggle with life. He found in Kafka permission to make autobiography into fable. Thomas Pynchon's paranoid systems and unknowable conspiracies show Kafka's influence. Characters in Pynchon's novels seek to understand systems that may or may not exist. They find patterns that may be meaningful or imaginary. The search for meaning in overwhelming complexity is Kafkaesque. So is the suspicion that the patterns exist primarily in the searcher's mind. Don DeLillo's bureaucratic corporations and security agencies operate like Kafka's castle. They exert power through opacity. They process people according to invisible logics. Characters cannot access the systems that control their lives. They can only observe effects without understanding causes. This is Kafka's insight applied to contemporary America. Kafka's influence extends beyond literature to film. Orson Welles adapted The Trial in 1962. The film emphasizes the nightmarish quality, the oppressive architecture, the multiplication of spaces and corridors. Wells understood that Kafka's world is visual as well as textual. The bureaucratic labyrinth can be filmed. The Coen brothers' films often feature Kafkaesque situations. Ordinary people are caught in circumstances beyond their understanding. They try to navigate systems that make no sense. Explanations are withheld. Authority is absent or malevolent. The universe is indifferent to human need for meaning. This is Kafka filtered through American genre cinema. Terry Gilliam's Brazil is explicitly Kafkaesque. The film depicts a bureaucratic dystopia where paperwork is more important than human life. A clerical error destroys a man's existence. The protagonist tries to find someone who can correct the mistake. No one can help because the system is the system. The film makes visible the nightmare logic of Kafka's bureaucracies. Television has absorbed Kafka as well. The prisoner trapped its protagonist in a village he cannot escape, subject to authority he cannot identify, accused of crimes he does not understand. The series has sustained Kafka. More recently, shows like The Twilight Zone and Black Mirror present Kafkaesque situations. Ordinary people encountering systems or technologies that trap them in nightmares. In visual art, Kafka's influence appears in work exploring bureaucracy, surveillance, and alienation. Artists create images of endless corridors, anonymous officials, forms and files, trapped individuals. They make visible the spaces Kafka described. They show what the castle looks like, what the court's architecture is. The word Kafkaesque entered common language. It describes specific experiences, dealing with bureaucracy that makes no sense, receiving contradictory instructions from authority, being accused without knowing what you did wrong, trying to reach someone in an organization who can help, waiting for responses that never come. These are Kafkaesque experiences. The word also describes aesthetics. Kafkaesque literature presents impossible situations with documentary flatness. It begins with fantastic premises treated as ordinary. It depicts systems that claim rationality but produce absurdity. It shows individuals powerless against forces they cannot comprehend. It maintains ambiguity about meaning and interpretation. Kafka's influence on philosophy has been substantial. His work influenced phenomenology and existentialism. It provided literary examples for philosophical concepts. Maurice Blanchot wrote extensively about Kafka, seeing in his work explorations of language's limits and literature's impossibility. Emmanuel Levinas discussed Kafka's ethics of the other. Giorgio Agamben used Kafka to explore concepts of sovereignty and exception. The court in the trial represents the state of exception where law is suspended. Joseph K. exists in the gap between law and life. He is neither fully inside the legal system nor outside it. This liminal state interested Agamben philosophically. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari wrote a book on Kafka, arguing his work was not about meaning but about function. Kafka's writing is a machine that produces effects. It deterritorializes language. It creates lines of flight from dominant structures. Their reading is controversial, but it shows Kafka's generative power for philosophical thought. In psychology and psychoanalysis, Kafka's work provided rich material. Freudians read Kafka as depicting Oedipal conflict, castration anxiety, and neurotic guilt. Jungians found archetypal patterns. Lacanians examined language and desire. Kafka's texts support multiple psychoanalytic readings because they emerge from deep psychological truth. Popular culture absorbed Kafka as well. References to the trial and the Metamorphosis appear in music, comic books, video games. The image of transformation, the nightmare of accusation, the labyrinth of bureaucracy, these have become cultural touchstones. People who have never read Kafka recognize these elements. Video games have created Kafkaesque experiences, games where rules are unclear, where progress seems impossible, where systems seem designed to frustrate, games where the goal is obscure and the path keeps changing, games where you are observed but cannot see the observers. These are interactive versions of Kafka's nightmares. The internet has generated new Kafkaesque situations. Automated systems make decisions about our lives. We cannot reach humans to appeal. We are banned from platforms without explanation. Our data is collected and used in ways we do not understand. Algorithms judge us according to criteria we cannot access. This is the castle implemented in code. Social media creates Kafkaesque dynamics. We are constantly observed and judged. We do not know who is watching or what they think. We perform for invisible audiences. We modify ourselves to please systems we do not understand. We are reduced to metrics and engagement statistics. Our human reality is compressed into data. The COVID-19 pandemic produced Kafkaesque experiences worldwide. Contradictory directives from authorities, rules that change without explanation, bureaucratic procedures for accessing help, forms and documentation required for everything. People trapped in situations beyond their control, subject to decisions made by distant authorities. The pandemic made everyone live in Kafka's world. Kafka's influence shows no sign of diminishing. Each generation rediscovers him and finds new relevance. The structures he described have only intensified. Bureaucracy has expanded. Technology has made surveillance more pervasive. Authority has become more remote. Power has become more opaque. We understand Kafka better now because we live more fully in the world he described. But Kafka's influence is not only negative, he also provided tools for understanding and resistance. By making visible how power operates, he gave us language to name our experiences. When we call something Kafkaesque, we are refusing to accept it as normal. We are recognizing absurdity. We are asserting that the emperor has no clothes. Kafka showed that literature could do more than represent reality. It could reveal reality's hidden structures. It could make visible what habit had made invisible. It could defamiliarize the familiar and show the strangeness of what we accept as normal. This was a gift to literature, a new way of seeing and writing. His work endures because it is both specific and universal. Specific to his time, his place, his psychological reality, but universal in its insights about power, systems, alienation, and the human condition. Kafka wrote about Prague in 1910 and described the world in 2025. This is not prophecy, it is profound observation. He saw what was already there and showed it to us. Living in Kafka's world, relevance today. Franz Kafka died in 1924, yet his world is ours. The structures he described have not disappeared. They have intensified, multiplied, and colonized new domains. We live in bureaucratic systems more complex than any Kafka encountered. We are subject to surveillance more pervasive than he imagined. We face algorithmic judgment he could not have foreseen. Kafka's relevance has only increased with time. Consider the experience of dealing with modern institutions. You call customer service, you navigate an automated phone system, press 1 for this, 2 for that. None of the options match your situation. You wait on hold. Eventually you reach a person. They cannot help. You need a different department. You are transferred. You wait again. You explain your problem again. This person also cannot help. You need to fill out a form. The form is online. You cannot find it. You call back. The system starts over. This is Kafkaesque. You have a simple problem. The organization exists to solve such problems, but the system prevents solution. No individual is malicious. Everyone is trying to help within their assigned role. But the structure makes help impossible. You spend hours achieving nothing. You abandon the effort or comply with absurd procedures. The system wins through exhaustion. Or consider airport security. You remove your shoes, your belt, your jacket. You place liquids in tiny bottles in a clear bag. You cannot bring water, but you can buy water after security. The rules seem arbitrary. They change without explanation. One airport allows something, another forbids it. You are selected for additional screening. You do not know why. You cannot ask why. You submit to the search or you do not fly. You are not accused of a crime, but you are treated as potentially criminal. You must prove your innocence by complying with procedures. The procedures demonstrate power, not security. Everyone knows this, but everyone complies. To resist is to be detained, questioned, possibly arrested. The choice is between submission and punishment. This is Joseph K. Quote choice. Modern employment resembles Gregor Samsa's situation. You are valued for your function, not yourself. When you can no longer perform the function, you are discarded. The organization speaks of loyalty and family, but when profits require cuts, people are eliminated. Your years of service mean nothing. You are replaced immediately. The organization continues without you. The language is bureaucratic. You are not fired, you are downsized. Your position is eliminated, not you personally. Nothing personal, just business. This language obscures reality. You are discarded because you are no longer useful. The system has no loyalty, no gratitude, no memory. You are a replaceable part in a machine. Technology has created new Kafkaesque situations. Your account is suspended. You do not know why. The email says you violated terms of service. It does not say which terms or how. You cannot appeal to a human. You fill out automated forms. You receive automated responses. Your account remains suspended. You have lost access to years of photos, messages, contacts. They are gone. The system has judged you an executed sentence without trial, or your loan application is denied. The decision was made by an algorithm. The algorithm considered thousands of variables. You cannot know which variables mattered. You cannot challenge the decision because you cannot understand it. The algorithm is proprietary. Even the bank does not fully understand how it works. You are judged by a system more inscrutable than Kafka's court. Social media platforms use recommendation algorithms. The algorithm decides what you see. It learns from your behavior. It shows you content that will keep you engaged, but you do not know how it works. You cannot control what it shows you. It shapes your reality without your consent or understanding. You are subject to a system that knows you better than you know yourself. Surveillance is now constant. Your phone tracks your location, your searches are recorded, your purchases are monitored, your conversations are analyzed. This data is collected, combined, sold. You agree to this by clicking accept on terms you did not read. The surveillance is legal, voluntary, inescapable. You cannot participate in modern life without submitting to it. The watchers are invisible. You do not know who has access to your data or how they use it. You cannot opt out meaningfully. Not using technology means not participating in society. Jobs require email. Schools require online access. Government services are digital. To refuse surveillance is to accept marginalization. Kafka's court watched from hiding. Now cameras and algorithms watch everyone, always. Governments use Kafkaesque procedures in immigration and security. People are detained without charge. They are held indefinitely. They cannot see the evidence against them. National security prevents disclosure. They must prove they are not threats. But how do you prove what you have not done? How do you defend against accusations you cannot see? The procedures are legal. They are also Kafkaesque. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed how Kafkaesque modern bureaucracy has become. Rules changed constantly. Authorities gave contradictory guidance. One agency said one thing, another said the opposite. People could not get clear answers. They filled out forms for assistance. The forms disappeared into systems. Money arrived months late or not at all. People waited on hold for hours. No one could help because the system was overwhelmed. Healthcare is particularly Kafkaesque. Insurance companies deny coverage. You appeal. They deny again. You do not understand why. The explanation uses medical codes and policy language. You need the treatment but cannot afford to pay directly. You are trapped between medical need and bureaucratic refusal. The insurance company exists to provide coverage, but its incentive is to deny claims. The system contradicts its stated purpose. Modern education has become bureaucratic. Standardized tests reduce students to scores. Forms and assessments multiply. Teachers spend more time documenting than teaching. Students navigate complex requirements for graduation, college admission, financial aid. The bureaucracy claims to serve students but often obstructs learning. The system prioritizes measurement over education. Corporate bureaucracy has intensified. Companies grow larger and more complex. Decisions are made in distant headquarters. Employees cannot reach decision makers. Policies are set by people who do not understand local realities. The organization claims to value employees but treats them as resources to be optimized. Mission statements speak of purpose and values. Actual practice contradicts these words. Politics has become Kafkaesque. Voters feel powerless. Politicians seem remote. Campaign promises are made and broken. Policies are decided by donors and lobbyists, not citizens. The system claims to be democratic but feels rigged. People cannot make themselves heard. Their votes seem meaningless. They are told they have power but experience powerlessness. Social movements arise to challenge these systems. People organize to demand change. But the systems absorb protest. Corporations adopt progressive language while continuing harmful practices. Governments create committees to study problems rather than solving them. The system appears to respond, but nothing fundamentally changes. The appearance of movement disguises underlying stasis. Kafka's characters could not escape their situations. Neither can we. We cannot opt out of bureaucracy. We cannot refuse surveillance. We cannot avoid algorithmic judgment. We must participate in systems we do not control and cannot understand. We are all Joseph K., trying to navigate incomprehensible systems that judge us. We are all K., seeking validation from authorities we cannot reach. But Kafka's relevance is not only descriptive. His work also provides tools for understanding and resistance. When we recognize something as Kafkaesque, we are refusing to accept it as normal. We are asserting that the absurdity is real, not imagined. We are validating our own experience against the system's gaslighting. Kafka showed that individual resistance may be futile, but awareness is valuable. His characters do not overthrow their oppressors, but they bear witness to their experiences. They do not accept that the absurdity is their fault. They maintain some critical distance even as they are destroyed. This is a model for how to maintain humanity within dehumanizing systems. Reading Kafka today is both disturbing and cathartic. Disturbing because his nightmares are our reality. Cathartic because someone understood, someone saw, someone expressed what we feel but struggle to articulate. We are not crazy for thinking the systems are absurd. They are absurd. Kafka proved it a century ago. His work reminds us that bureaucratic rationality is not the only rationality. Human values exist outside systems, meaning exist beyond procedures. The castle does not define worth. The court does not determine guilt. These are human judgments that systems claim to make but cannot. We must remember this even when systems claim total authority. Kafka also showed that systems depend on our compliance. Joseph K. could have refused to participate in his trial. He did not because he accepted its legitimacy. If we refuse to internalize the guilt systems impose, if we reject their claim to judge us, if we maintain our own sense of worth independent of their validation, we retain some freedom. This is difficult. We need employment, healthcare, education, the services systems provide. We cannot simply withdraw, but we can maintain critical awareness. We can refuse to believe that the system's judgment of us is the final truth. We can recognize absurdity while navigating it. We can help others trapped in the same systems. We can bear witness. Kafka wrote about powerlessness, but his writing is empowering. It names our experience. It makes visible what systems hide. It shows us we are not alone in our frustration and confusion. Millions of people encounter the same absurdities. This shared recognition is the beginning of solidarity, and solidarity is the beginning of resistance. We live in Kafka's world. The bureaucracies have grown. The surveillance has intensified. The systems have become more complex and more opaque. Technology has created new mechanisms of control. But humans have also created new ways of connecting, organizing, and resisting. We have tools Kafka did not have. We have networks he could not imagine. The struggle is not over. The systems continue to expand and evolve, but so does awareness. More people recognize Kafkaesque situations. More people refuse to accept them as inevitable. More people demand accountability from institutions. More people insist on being treated as humans, not data points. This is not victory, but it is resistance. Kafka's final relevance is this. He showed that literature matters. Words on a page can reveal truth about power. Stories can make visible what ideology obscures. A man writing alone at night in Prague created work that helps people understand their lives a century later. This is not small. This is literature doing what it should do, telling the truth, bearing witness, creating solidarity across time and space. We live in Kafka's world. But we also have Kafka's work, and that makes a difference.